Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Welcome to episode, I think, 6 we're on now, alhamdulillah. And today we are joined by the usual brother, Muslim Metaphysician here. We have brother Sharif here and brother Abdulrahman there. Oh, no way, I got all the pointing right first time.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
Wa alaikum salam. Do apologize slightly for the delay. So we've sort of had a bit of a hiccup at the beginning trying to get the admins on. They were logged on the wrong account. And so, yeah, forgive us for that. But so today we're going to be focusing on the stage 2 elements of the Kalam argument. So for those of you who don't know, we're going to basically give a quick recap of stage 1. So these are arguments in favor of a necessary being. And there's many of them. We're not going to go over all of them because there's too many. But we'll focus on a couple. And from there, you basically get this idea of a necessary being, or a particular kind of being which is unique. But you don't necessarily, from these arguments, get this idea of a God. And so stage 2 is to make the inference from the necessary being to a being that would be commonly understood as a God in the Abrahamic sense, for one. And so, yeah, and we're going to kind of go over that. So does any brothers want to kind of step in maybe with a little bit of an intro, any like adding on to what I've just said, or what do you think is probably the best way to sort of segue into this?
Yeah, I think we should, reiterate how we got to this point from stage 1. So I'll give my take on it. So yeah, we had a previous stream where we tried to argue for a necessary being. So if you guys aren't familiar with that, you should go back and watch that. But we were trying to argue that a necessary being exists from the contingency of the world, by the fact that we have all these contingent things in reality. There must be a sort of necessary foundation to explain all these contingent entities. And so we tried to arrive at that conclusion. But then the question that we're dealing with today, as far as stage 2 argument, is what are the properties? Can we derive any properties from this necessary being? What are the sort of properties that it has? What are the sort of properties that it wouldn't have? And by analyzing the properties of this necessary being, this is sort of what's called stage 2 cosmological arguments, where we can try to say a little bit more about this necessary being or cause and see whether or not it matches up with, typically the attributes of God, or what we would conceive of as God, or is it more something that's, and I know Abdul doesn't necessarily like this word natural, but is it something that is purely natural and can be explained by natural means? Or is it something more akin to what theists mean by God, which is what we think and what we're going to be arguing for today. So I don't know if the brothers have anything else they want to add as far as how we're getting to the point we are at now.
Yeah, I was going to just quickly add. So previously what we talked about is that contingent beings are things that exist but could exist in another way, or they don't have to exist. Yeah. So when you come across something that's contingent, in essence, what we're saying is that that thing requires an explanation as to why it is that particular way and why it exists. So I think I gave the example last time of a red triangle. So if you've got a red triangle, by the fact that it has 3 sides is necessary for a triangle, because triangles have 3 sides. But the fact that it's red as opposed to blue or green or yellow or any other color means that this is a contingent or possible thing or possible being. So we need an explanation. Why is it red? Because the redness of a triangle is not contained in its own definition of being a triangle. Yeah, so therefore that's why we call it contingent, and that's why we look for an explanation, and the explanation is outside of the existence of a triangle. So we look at other possible explanations as to why this triangle is red as opposed to another color. Now the next question then becomes, well, okay, the other things that we look at, are they either contingent beings, meaning that they require an explanation outside of itself, or is it ends with a necessary being, something that is that has its own explanation contained in and of itself. Yeah, it has aseity, has independency, has self-sufficiency. So the argument goes is that a contingent being dependent upon another contingent being cannot go on forever in an infinite regress of causal relationships or causal explanations. So there needs to be a necessary being, some starting point, something that's independent, that doesn't need an explanation outside of itself, and therefore this is what we call a necessary being. So that's the basic argument, how we came to the conclusion of a necessary being. It's because of how we understand what contingency is. It's because of the impossibility of a necessary being, of infinite regress to explain the existence of necessary contingent beings, and therefore the need for a necessary, eternal, independent being. Now, many atheists, or a number of atheists, will accept that position. Yeah, they don't find it too problematic, because they're arguing that it could be a naturalistic, eternal thing. Yeah, it doesn't have to have a will, it doesn't have to have a mind, doesn't have to have consciousness, doesn't have to be all-knowing, what we would typically understand as a theistic view of God. So we want to go, as the brother's already mentioned, how do we go from that discussion to a necessary being that has a intentionality, has a will, has a mind to create, and it's not just something that's forced or is a mechanical force within the universe that creates automatically without any choice.
MashaAllah. And Brother Abdulrahman, do you want to say anything before I chime in?
Yeah, I wanted to first, take a few steps
You're
back
muted,
and talk about.
Abdul.
No, he's not.
Am I?
No.
No, that's no.
No, we can hear him. Might be on your end.
Oh, it's my mic. Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. So I just wanted to talk about a few points, like in the beginning, about a lot of Muslims have these concerns about like these arguments and the complexity of the argument, and why we need to engage in these arguments in order to prove the existence of God. Because a lot of this talk seems like it's just way beyond the average person to understand, unless they study it in depth. Stuff like the metaphysics of causation and principle of sufficient reasons and the back and forth between the philosophers about these stuff. So I think it's important at the outset to point out that a lot of these concepts that we discuss are actually intuitively accessible. You don't need to formally express these ideas about causality and these concerns, these cosmological concerns we talk about with regard to the origins of the universe. They don't have to be formally accessible for them to be intuitively accessible. And I've noticed from my reading on this that once you really get into the depth of these discussions, and when you reach a conclusion that's more towards the theistic side, and you have a very strong philosophical rational basis for it, that really just does comport with that very basic intuition we have about how causality works, agent causation, intentionality, and all of that stuff. So because I think a lot of people do have that concern that a lot of these arguments are way, just over my head, and isn't necessary to believe in God. That's one aspect. So the second part I want to say with regard to the same concern is this epistemic concern that we have, that let's say, for example, science, when you talk about, because Kalam cosmological argument, for example, relates to a lot of scientific theories about time and the origin of the universe. Is there a state that science can take us to where these philosophical and existential questions will be less relevant? Can we reach a point of observation where these intuitions and these lines of reasoning about causality and the origin of the universe will be any different? And I think that the answer to that is a straight no, because we are limited by observation, and we do presuppose stuff before we do these observations. We presuppose certain aspects of these cosmological arguments before we make these observations, things like causality. It can be argued, and some philosophers do argue, that causality is something that's more a priori. You don't go out there and investigate and do empirical research and then causality exists. It's something that's presupposed in order for you not just to be able to investigate the external world, but in order for you to be able to think in a cogent way in the first place, there must be some causal series that's presupposed. So and then there's properly basic beliefs that Plantinga spoke about, and brother Jamie Turner is very good with that. So this is just the general intro I want to give about people who are very concerned with a lot of the complexities and nuances and the philosophical depth that these arguments can go to. I think you guys touched on how we briefly went through the stage one cosmological arguments. There are objections to it. We have causal arguments, which is the Kalam cosmological argument that relies on the finitude of causal chains. There's the contingency argument that doesn't rely on that. You can have an infinite series of past events, and you can argue for a strong or weak principle of sufficient reason and come to the existence of a necessary being. Alexander Proust does this very well. And then the stage two cosmological arguments is where you talk about the nature of this being, and you can approach that from many routes. One of the best ways that I like is when you bring the discussion back to the philosophy of mind and the role of will and agent causation, and you talk about these many different theories of causation and the metaphysicality. You can come to the conclusion that a non-temporal, eternal, necessary foundation of reality bringing about a temporal cause is best explained by an act of will. There are teleological concerns, fine-tuning, and design arguments where you can make a cumulative case and say that there is some form of intelligence. And there are other aspects that I think we'll go through throughout this stream, inshallah.
Inshallah, mashallah. Jazakallah khair for your contributions. So I just want to touch on a couple of things you mentioned there. So firstly, this idea that everything needs to be rationally explained or understood in order to be accepted. So there's a really good example of this with the problems of the external world. Many people don't have to go through this process of going through the philosophy of justifying the existence of the external world. We deal with it. It's there. We have this the present and immediate experience of it, and we can engage with it. And I think many people would agree, and maybe the odd one out may not, but many people would agree that you don't need a philosophical, rational justification in order to come to the conclusion that there is an external world. There are these intuitions that you have based like in experience itself. And this is enough for people to just accept it. And so that kind of goes into this idea of basic beliefs, which is a conversation obviously we can have with that. But that doesn't mean simply because that is the case that there isn't philosophical argument for it. And if you do want to engage in this philosophical argument, you need to exercise patience, put in the effort, and go through the work. Now, there are a lot of abstract concepts in the process of going through all of this. And, you know, this can be difficult for the average person or the layman to grapple with in the beginning. And we all go through this process when we first start engaging with this type of philosophy. It does get abstract. It doesn't mean that it's illogical or that there isn't a discussion to be had. You know, this discussion is being had, especially in academia. And even people on opposing sides seem to be able to have a cogent conversation with one another. They have disagreements and things like that. But for the most part, you know, there is a conversation. It's not just people talking over one another. It goes into that. So that's touching on that. Now, someone mentioned, I think it was Justin, about the idea of, well, why can't it be the infinite regress? And Abdulrahman also kind of touched on this as well. But so the arguments from things like dependency deal with the idea of a set of dependent things. That set can be any number. So it could be a finite number. It could be a never-ending regress of dependent things if you want it to be. But it's the whole point of it is that whatever this set is, you say there is a set of dependent things, and the whole is itself dependent, and therefore relies on something that isn't in the set, and so therefore can't be dependent. And if it was dependent, it'd be in the set. So whatever this set is, it has to rely on something outside of it, which has a unique kind of existence, that which is of independence. And so, you know, with this, the ideas of infinite regress are sort of overcome. You don't even have to discuss them because they can just be contained within the idea of a set. Like whatever number you want to apply to that, it's fine. It doesn't affect the argument in any way. So that's another thing that obviously is important to go on very briefly over that. And I think we're probably at a good point now where we can start moving on to discussing the stage 2, unless there's anything else any of you wanted to add on before we did that.
Yeah, just before we go to the stage 2, I know we put it on the bottom of the screen, but I just want to make a formal announcement. We are on several different locations now other than YouTube. So what do you guys remember what all of them are? Because I can't remember.
It's pretty much all the major podcast platforms. So you probably find us on places like Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, I think is another one. I think we'll get one of the admins to put them up in a comment on the screen while we're discussing things. But, you know, just if you're using any particular streaming or podcast service, just search us on there. And if you're already using that, inshallah, we should be on there. If we aren't on a particular service that you use, just drop us a comment in this video. Let us know what it is, and we'll see if we can also make it so that we can add our services on there as well. But you should find us anywhere. So if you're the kind of person that likes listening to podcasts while you're driving and things like that, and you're not really using YouTube when you're out and about, and inshallah, this should be available to you. And like I say, if it isn't, then let us know. And other than that, make sure to follow us on all the major social media platforms. So we're on Twitter with this tag at T_A_podcast. So do give us a follow on there if you haven't already. We're also on Facebook. If you just search Thought Adventure Podcast, we should come up, and the same for Instagram as well. And other than that, I think we've pretty much covered all of the social media aspects for the Thought Adventure Podcast. So anything else, or should we move on to the...
No, that's it. I just wanted to reiterate that we are available now on Spotify and Apple, which I guess are the other big apps and sites to find us at. So if you guys aren't, on YouTube as much, you can definitely check us out there.
Inshallah. So moving on now to the stage 2 arguments. Who would like to begin there with the kind of transition to that? Any brothers want to jump in?
So I just maybe introduce it. I think there's 4 key, number of different arguments, but I sort of use 4 key general arguments. The first argument, and I just want to briefly go over it, and maybe the brothers can add more detail. But the first one is, if we accept that contingent things require a necessary being, then we're also accepting that contingent beings ultimately have a beginning in time, beginning in creation. Yeah, so they didn't exist eternally. There was a beginning, but you'd have an eternal necessary being, but which is the cause. So you have an eternal cause, but the effect, which is the creation or the cause of contingent beings, are temporal. So if the eternal cause did not choose to create, then the eternal cause would always create, which means that the effect would always be eternal. The fact that the effect is not eternal, but the cause is eternal, indicates a will, a decision to make the choice to when to, affect, or cause the contingent beings to exist. That's first argument. Second argument is that contingent beings are those things which could have multiple different attributes. The fact that water could boil at 110 or 120 or 90 degrees Celsius are all possibilities for the water at room conditions, assuming we're on Earth and we're, 1 atmosphere, etc. It could have a number of different attributes. There's nothing necessary in what water is and contingent beings are to explain why it has those particular attributes. Yeah, even if you want to talk about hydrogen bonding, you can talk about why you have hydrogen bonding, and you keep regressing back, you'll find that there's a necessary foundation that has to actualize all of these potential attributes. The fact that you've got a number of different choices and the necessary being chooses or has to determine one choice over another indicates another, or is another indication for will. The third argument would be an argument from consciousness, because in the last episode that we had, we demonstrated that consciousness itself cannot arise from non-consciousness. there needs to be something that always exists as conscious in order to bring consciousness in contingent beings. In essence, that's the conclusion. If you can't ground consciousness on materialism, then you need something that's conscious. In essence, consciousness needs to be caused by something. This indicates that if there is a necessary being, that necessary foundation must also be conscious. And the fourth one, like I said, I'm really going over these really quickly. The fourth one would be an argument of arbitrary limits, which I think other brothers will explain further. But simply saying that a necessary being, which is unlimited, independent, eternal, has a particular limit that it doesn't necessarily not have to have. Meaning, if you've got something that has a limit, but it's the reason why it has that particular limitation is not something that's explained by its own existence, then you need to explain it by some other recourse to another existence. Because we're talking about an independent, eternal, necessary being, then this independent, eternal, necessary being cannot have arbitrary or contingent limits, like not being conscious. Because if it's not conscious, you're going to ask the question, well, why is it not conscious? You know, what's caused it not to be not conscious, if you know what I mean? So if you're talking about an unlimited creator, to create an arbitrary limit of not being conscious would require an explanation. Yeah, so that's just really covering it really briefly as possible as an overview.
MashaAllah. And any of the other two brothers want to jump in there?
Yeah. The argument from free will, I think, when we take the discussion back to the philosophy of mind and consciousness, I think it's hugely relevant. If we've concluded the existence of a first cause or a necessary being that does not depend on anything else, then by logical entailment, this necessary being or this first cause is able to causelessly cause things. That means it is able to cause things without an external force acting upon it. And when we take this back to the philosophy of mind and the metaphysics of causation, we speak about agent causation. We can relate to this idea of causelessly causing when we talk about free will. And one way to look at it is when you sort of try to deconstruct how we really know that other agents that we interact with have free will, or more broadly have minds of their own at all. And in philosophy, it's called the problem of other minds, because I can interact with Jake, and I can see his motion and the physical stimuli that surrounds him, but I don't have any direct access to his mind. And there is nothing.
I thought you were going to say my beautiful face, but that's okay.
That too. There's nothing that is directly observable about Jake having a mind or Jake having a will of his own to initiate action. And there is nothing about the physical features that I see about Jake that tells me that he necessarily has a mind. I could be looking at somebody that is deformed, and I could still think that or infer that they have minds. I'd be looking at a creature that is not human and still from their behavior infer that they have minds. How do we do this? I think part of how we do it, and the most essential point, is that there is something non-deterministic about the behavior of a creature that has a mind, meaning that when you have a mind, it doesn't seem that you're simply reacting to physical stimuli. It doesn't seem that, the wind is blowing me around like it would blow around a rock, for example. It doesn't seem that I'm merely reacting to my physical stimuli. It seems that I'm behaving in a way that's not directly determined by my physical stimuli. Now, I don't know if Justin's watching, but we don't have to take this to whether we actually have free will or not. But all we're trying to say is that what it seems to have free will is that we are behaving in a non-deterministic manner that is not entirely determined by our physical stimuli, even if it might be the case that this is an illusion. But that's how we infer the existence of a will when it comes to other creatures. Now, when you take this back to the first cause or the necessary being, it's really more worth attributing a will or a a free will or a mind to this necessary cause than it would be to any being at all. Because by definition or by logical entailment, we know that this being must be acting non-deterministically in the sense that it does not rely on external factors to influence it. So even if it's an illusion in our case and we don't have free will, we know for a fact that this necessary being or this first cause is in fact causelessly causing things to occur in a way that is just more free will like than anything else in our experience. So if we're justified in positing a will to anything at all, I would say that it would be most justified to posit a will for this independent, causelessly causing being. There's another aspect about there are epistemic concerns that Robert Koons raises about what it's like to give an ultimate explanation or to conceptualize this necessary foundation of reality and how that influences our epistemic approach to these things. So when we say that every contingent thing has a cause, that seems to be something that, whether that's determined by experience or whether that's just an a priori fact that you, or principle that you live by, it is quite clear that in our day-to-day lives, as well as in our scientific inspection of the world, we always assume that there is a cause for any contingent fact. And scientists do this all the time. It's not like a scientist will make some observation with an apparently unexplained property and say that it just is. No, what they do is they normally start with the assumption that there is an explanation, and they keep tracking back until they get the most plausible explanation possible. Now, the question is, what is this epistemic limitation of science? At what point will science stop and say, okay, there's no explanation beyond this point? Because remember, we're limited by our observation. So there is really nothing you can observe about the world that would justify you in saying that there is no cause beyond this, because from your very starting point, you've assumed that everything has a cause in the first place, and even things that don't seem to have causes are assumed to have causes, and we go on and investigate them. So from there, this takes us back to the idea of an infinite regress. We already agreed, or at least the theists agreed, with the stage one cosmological argument that there isn't an infinite regress. So there is this stopping point. There is going to be an explanatory stopping point on any worldview, whether you're an atheist or a theist. Now, the question is, what is it that differentiates this necessary being from these contingent facts? If the necessary being was, or the necessary thing, because some people think that by being we mean something conscious, but in philosophy it just means an existent, right? So this necessary being, if it is merely a contingent natural fact, right, or that you're just going to slap the label natural on it, so if you say it's some kind of quantum foam or whatever, and that it is necessary, the problem with that is that there is nothing that ontologically distinguishes this necessary fact or this necessary entity with everything else that's contingent, which you assume has a cause. So it seems like it would be a case of special pleading to say that there is this other necessary thing. There's nothing that I can distinguish it. There's nothing that I can say distinguishes it from the natural world in a true ontological sense, but it doesn't have a cause. That seems like special pleading, and I think Graham Oppy does this when he says that the initial item is just a natural fact that doesn't have a cause, and it doesn't have a cause simply by virtue of its necessity. And I think Robert Koon raises a very interesting concern with him when he says that, well, if that's the case and any contingent fact can be the necessary stopping point we're looking for, then why don't you just stop at your experience? Because you can't prove that you existed 5 minutes ago. You can't prove your memory. You just have a current state of mind that you really have no means to investigate how you arrived at this state of mind. So Robert Koons raises the question, and it might seem like a trivial one because we know that our memories, let's say, we know that they're real. But given this epistemic approach to the philosophy and metaphysics of modality, if you're going to say that something apparently contingent or natural can be necessary, then what's stopping you from saying that your very own experience, your first person subjective experience, is this necessary stopping point, and you're the necessary being. Now, of course, it seems silly, but then the silliness of a question is just a consequence of the silliness of the epistemology, where you special plead and say that something contingent can be necessary. And from that, we go back to what Brother Sharif was saying about arbitrariness. So there is something about ultimate explanations that both philosophers and scientists acknowledge, that, you know, you just don't want it to be arbitrary. An ultimate explanation doesn't seem like it's the kind of thing that can be arbitrary. Like if I tell you that the necessary foundation of reality is the number 4, for example, or even if it's something with, you know, a certain power that's limited at the level 4, well, that very property seems to be a contingent fact that a scientist or a philosopher would like an explanation for, because it's a certain property, it's a certain limitation that calls for an explanation. That's what a contingent fact is. So this non-arbitrariness that we're looking for is something that can serve as a very good candidate for this necessary being. And Rasmussen speaks about this supreme nature of this non-arbitrary necessary being, and he says that, well, we have causal powers that are, you know, a result of our intentionality and our will. Is this necessary foundation that actually has person-making properties? Are we going to limit it from that kind of causal power? If we're going to assume, of course, that this agent causation is a thing, which obviously would have to be argued for, but at least from our first-person perspective, agent causation is a thing, and free will does seem to be a thing. So why would you place this arbitrary limitation on this, you know, necessary foundation when you don't really need to? And in fact, actually, philosophers these days, I know I'm going on a bit, I'm going to stop right now, but atheist philosophers these days, they don't mind positing things like panpsychism by saying, you know what, to solve this hard problem of consciousness, let's say that everything has some, you know, fundamental level of proto-consciousness. They don't mind doing that. And they don't mind also saying that there's a necessary natural thing. But what you're doing here is you're basically positing that if there is a cause for the universe, it has some type of consciousness. So you're getting awfully close to the idea of God, and you're kind of blurring the lines between theism and atheism. So if you don't mind, you know, making these kinds of maneuvers in order to get out of problems like the hard problem of consciousness, then I think it's very reasonable for us to say that there is very good rational basis for positing the idea that the first cause has free will and it has this agent causal power we're talking about. There are other teleological aspects, but I think we can leave that for later.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to touch on the causality thing that you were mentioning. So there are arguments for a priori understanding of causality, that we just know prior to experience that causality is an existent thing. But I would also argue, say if we're discussing this with an atheist, and they're, for the sake of being able to deny a particular premise out of the Kalam, they're denying that causality is a thing. Now, you can make an argument a posteriori, and you can even make an argument that causality is one of the most empirically verified things we've got in terms of like the scientific community. There has not been any experience at all since in recorded history of within the scientific community itself of something, of an effect occurring without a cause. We've got like countless data that causes are led by effects. And so if you want to deny this, you're risking putting yourself towards the position of a moral nihilist, basically. You're not a moral nihilist, an epistemic nihilist, in the fact that you're saying, knowledge is going to be something incredibly difficult to gain at all. The scientific community completely presupposes these ideas of cause and effect. And it's necessary in order for the scientific community to be able to progress and to continue on the mission that it's on. There's no what point is there looking at the world, trying to discover things in it, if you can't even be sure that causes have effects or that effects have causes? It is literally one of the most widely documented things that we have within the scientific community. And if you want to go down that route of saying, well, I think someone made a comment here, like, you know, how do you, where is it? Somewhere here. There's too many comments, so I won't try to find it. But yeah, so how, you know, what do you do when someone denies cause and effect? So just point to this. Just point to the scientific community. Point to like everything else. Like if you want to say that we have ample evidence to suggest that the Earth is round, and I would agree with that. I would say we've got more evidence for cause and effect. I would say we've got more evidence for that than we have the majority, if not all, of the general claims that the scientific community are putting forward. And so to deny that is to completely kick your legs from under your feet. And especially if you're an atheist, rationality rules, we need empirical evidence for things, science is the best thing we've got. Like you're throwing that out of the window if you're going to start challenging ideas of cause and effect. So that's an incredibly important thing to take note of. And if you want to continue this conversation as, say, an atheist who holds the scientific method to, you know, with a very high regard, you can't just go ahead and throw causality out of the window, because you're pretty much kicking your own butt there by doing so.
I mean, even if you say, because I think it was Russell who said that causality is just this heuristic tool that we use in the world, and that it doesn't necessarily have to be descriptive of the world. I mean, even if you say that, you have some grounds. If you say if it's a heuristic tool, then you have some grounds to at least, from an epistemic basis, assume that every contingent thing has a cause, even if you're not definitively making the statement that it does. Although I think you need to make that statement because it has to be descriptive. Because if it isn't, then again, the problem of skepticism, a radical, unhealthy kind of skepticism where, well, how do you know anything has a cause? Well, just if you could stop somewhere and say that there is a contingent fact that doesn't have a cause, again, you could just stop at your own experience. Yeah. You could stop at actually any arbitrary line that you can draw in the middle of your investigation of the universe and just say, okay, it all stops here. Why not there? So yeah, so whether it's a heuristic or descriptive, I think it is either way. It's important to say that about these questions about the origins of the universe, it would be special pleading if you were to say that the universe having a cause, or the contingent world, or the cosmos having a cause, is something we don't know, because you don't really know it about anything else if you're going to go down that route.
Yeah, definitely. And Brother Jake, we've not heard from you in a little bit. So do you want to jump in there with anything, kind of add or cover the bases that we've not touched on so far?
Yeah, I mean, the brothers pretty much covered everything. They stole my thunder, but I just want to reiterate one point. And for me, a key issue is the idea of investigating what the properties of the cause are. So if we look at the cause and based on things like the Kalam cosmological argument, we affirm or try to demonstrate that the universe had a beginning. The question is, how do you get in order to stop the infinite regress? The argument is that whatever the cause is, it's going to go back and it's going to be an eternal cause of some sort. And so the question is, if the cause of the universe is eternal and all of physical reality, then how do you explain a temporal effect from an eternal cause? So the idea is, for example, take the example of water. If water freezing, if it freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, under normal conditions, of course, if it freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, and those conditions are met, they're necessary and sufficient to produce the effect, then the whole question is, why would the effect be temporal and the cause be eternal? It wouldn't make sense. If it's merely just mechanistic in the way that we understand from science today, in the idea that I'm explaining about the water freezing at 0 degrees Celsius, well, then we would expect that the effect would also be eternal alongside the cause. And yet that's not the experience that we have. Our best science and the philosophical arguments that we gave point to the idea of the universe having a beginning, and it is produced from an eternal cause. Now, I don't see any way out of this problem of getting a temporal effect from an eternal cause without positing a will to the cause of that temporal effect. In the same way that we have experiences, for example, I'm talking right now, I can will to stand up freely at any moment. And this can explain how my will is sufficient to produce the effect, and yet it doesn't produce the effect until I will myself to stand up. The same thing like how we understand God creating the universe. He is sufficient eternally to cause the universe to exist, but it's by his will, when he chooses to do so and brings it about, that it is brought about. I don't understand any way how to explain this or get out of this problem from a naturalistic paradigm of explaining how you get this temporal effect from an eternal cause if the cause is sufficient to produce the effect. If the cause is not sufficient to produce the effect, then how is that the necessary being or the necessary cause of creation? Then we have to go back a step even further and then reanalyze what that cause is. So it just pushes it a step back further. You have to get, in my view, to a stopping point in which the cause is changeless in that initial state, that it is necessary to produce that effect, and yet it doesn't do so by our standards of evidence that we have now. And so I guess what I'm saying here is how I've analyzed this in one way, because the other brothers mentioned a few other different ways. But one way is to say that the best explanation of getting a temporal cause from a temporal effect from an eternal cause is to say that this cause had a will. And if it had a will, then this is starting to look much more like the picture of God or a personal being, rather than just some kind of mechanistic, naturalistic explanation that an atheist might want to give. So I think that this provides the best reason or the best explanation of how you get a temporal effect from an eternal cause. And the other brothers mentioned some other arguments as well, but I think they covered it very well. So I think that's sufficient for the explanation. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Yusuf, or the other brothers.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Yeah, so I just wanted to add, in summary, I think we can sort of make this rather simple in the sense, obviously, we've covered it in detail, but this is just like one kind of quick element into it. So we're understanding this necessary being as being one that is independent. That is, there is nothing outside of it acting upon it. There is no cause which this thing is the effect of. It exists utterly uniquely. We've not just kind of thrown this out there, but we've given you reasoned deductive arguments to lead you to these conclusions. And with that, we ask, well, what is it that makes this thing create or bring things that are contingent, that are dependent on it into existence? Now, the argument here is that if there is nothing acting upon it, that it must be self-determined, and that this is the closest thing that you're going to get to explaining that something has a will. And as Brother Abdulrahman pointed out, that, you know, even this is a whole separate argument with regards to the free will of human beings, and we can make a separate podcast. I think it would be a very good one as well, on the idea of the free will of the human being. But that is a separate tangent that we don't want to get into today, and we'll set something aside for that in particular. But to focus on today's argument, that this necessary being has a will, and by definition would be the freest kind of will. There are no external causes acting upon it, and so therefore we are opening up this idea of something choosing to act as and when it pleases, without and that being completely self-dependent, not relying on external things interacting with it in any way. It is a willing being choosing to bring things that are dependent upon it into existence. So I think that pretty much wraps it up in a rather simple. Can I just add
one quick point? You know, there's something called SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and this is where scientists are looking at the sky and the universe, and they're trying to look for signals which have no naturalistic origin, meaning it cannot be explained by the physical laws. Because if something cannot be explained by physical laws, which would necessitate or a which would cause a particular set of effects, then the only cause that would create these types of like radio waves, or signals within the universe would require an intelligence. So the way SETI and scientists look for intelligence is when they identify that something that occurs cannot be explained by naturalistic forces. Therefore, it must be explained by the idea of intelligence and a conscious agent. And in essence, we're doing the exact same thing here. So even if people turn around and say, well, quote unquote, it's not scientific, it's this, that, and the other, actually, this is what science does in terms of the SETI project.
MashaAllah. So just to kind of let you know as well, me and brother Sharif, it's Maghrib, so we're going to have to just nip away for 5 minutes and pray. But we're going to kind of open it up now with a conversation with brother Justin. And he's going to begin the conversation with brother Jake and brother Abdulrahman. And we will be back shortly. So just bear with us. And that's just to kind of explain our absence now. So I'll just bring Justin in. We'll say our greetings. Hello, Justin.
Hello.
Captain Mighty Beard.
You guys got to run away?
Yeah, we're going to run away. You're just too intimidating. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
I'd be less intimidating if you would still have your beard, but
I know I'm so good. Don't rub that in. I tried neating it and making it look better, and it was the first time doing it, and I ruined it, and then I ended up with no beard.
It looked like Sabrina's hair from the Rugrats.
Yeah, it looked absolutely terrible. So I'm going to, inshallah, next time learn from my mistake and leave it to a barber to try and sort out. But I'm going to have to run, so I'll talk to you when I get back. But
go.
Enjoy your conversation with the other two brothers.
All right.
What's up, Justin?
So what's going on, Justin?
Guys? What's up?
Nothing much, man. I see you've been listening in the background. So what do you think?
I like what you guys are saying. I did have a question. How does something causelessly cause? I'm kind of confused about that.
Oh, I think that was similar language that Abdul was using, if I'm correct. Right?
Yeah. It causes without external influence, or let's say it causes without like the need for a mechanistic process. And the closest thing we can, the closest thing we have to that from our experience is our will. I don't want to take you to a discussion about free will, but I'm just talking about your experience of free will. Hey, I want to raise my hand. I raise my hand. So that's basically what I mean by causelessly causing. In a way, you can say that there's something causing it, which is the will. But I mean, what initiates the action is not a mechanistic process, and it's not something that relies on a process that is external to the agent that is acting.
Okay. Which is something that I would like to talk about, because if you guys, I speak to you guys about on a daily basis. I've recently kicked materialism out the window and took up dualism, still as an atheist, but I'm a dualist. Just because it just doesn't make any sense. It took a while for me to understand what you guys were saying, like your contentions with materialism and whatnot. And I eventually kicked that can out the window.
You're getting closer, Justin.
I am. And somebody had said in the chat, I don't exactly remember who said it, but somebody said that that with Islam, there's only the need to believe that there is a creator, and anything further than that would come from revelation. How do you guys feel about that?
I don't understand. What do you mean?
Let me look up the exact. I'll look at the exact quote.
I mean, there are things that are going to come from revelation that we just, ipso facto believe from revelation. And not everything has to be rationally accessible about God, even though I think to a very large degree it is. But if you're talking about like a generic understanding of God, like a conscious being with free will and intelligence and causal power, that's
It says in here in the chat, I don't want to call him out, but somebody in the chat had said one point that's not made so often. Islam only necessitates that we believe in the existence of a creator as his attributes and not sensed. Ultimately, we need a revelation from him to know his attributes.
Okay, but I mean, but because the fact that Islam requires it means that you'd already have a revelation for Islam. So I guess what he would be saying was that, like, aside from scripture, like pre-scripturally, you would, if you're accountable for believing in anything, then that would simply be an intelligent creator. I guess that's what we'd be saying. So okay. To a certain degree, I agree that there are things about the creator that we can only know through revelation. But generally speaking, I think overall they're rationally accessible and they are coherent. And I think that the Islamic conception of God is the most coherent conception of God.
Yeah, not only that, I don't know if this person is a Muslim and where they're getting the idea from, but even our scholars talk about the attributes, the rational attributes that can be known apart from revelation. So we make a distinction between the two. And I don't know if he, was trying to say all of the attributes, so we can't know any of them apart from revelation. But this is not, from my understanding, is not the traditional Sunni understanding of God and his attributes. They make a distinction between the rational ones that we can apprehend, like knowledge, power, will, etc. But there are certain attributes, of course, that we wouldn't necessarily be able to prove purely from a rationalistic perspective. But we want to be careful and say that there's at least some that we can speak about intelligently apart from revelation. So yeah, we have to make that distinction. So I just hope that the person who commented understands that point. Some of the attributes we can know apart from revelation, some we can't.
Okay.
So Jake, you're saying some we can't. Can you give an example of those? I mean, I agree, but I just can't think of any.
Let me think off the top of my head.
Like what attributes came to you?
I can think of any. Like even if you think about like God's goodness, God's moral goodness, or God's justice. I mean, from our experience, there are rational arguments that kind of try to make a case for the fact that the necessary foundation, or God, must be a morally good being. So I don't know what attributes specifically, but I don't know, from a theological perspective, I don't want to say anything wrong, but just generally, personally, from my view, even aside from scripture, I find that the Islamic conception of God is the one that comports to my pre-scriptural conception of God, which is that, everything about the Islamic conception of God for me is rationally accessible. It doesn't mean we don't need scripture. We definitely need scripture. I'm saying that in a certain context.
Okay. I was going to say, I mean, if that was true, then I already have the Shahada pulled up, and I was going to go ahead and say it today. But I mean, you guys kind of talked me out of it.
In terms of what?
if the only thing that Islam necessitates is that you believe in some type of existence that caused everything, then I'll be like, okay, I'm there. Let's do it.
Well, Justin, if we're because we need to contextualize things. So as far as certain arguments are concerned, for example, if you look at the Kalam cosmological argument alone, that's not going to get you God's goodness, right? So it depends on what kind of line of reasoning you're discussing. And generally speaking, I think about, and different arguments will work for different people. And we spoke about this before, about how Graham Oppy's philosophy of argumentation, right? How it's very appealing because it's contextualized, that an argument will work for you if you accept the premises. If you don't accept the premises, then a good argument, what it will do is it will point to some kind of consistency within your prior beliefs that would make you, have to do some work to maybe either accept the premise or reevaluate your beliefs. But generally speaking, not all arguments are going to work for everybody. But there, I think, at least cosmological arguments and putting them like extending cosmological arguments to other arguments and making a cumulative case, I think in that sense it's appealing to anybody, because we all, except for like a radical skeptic who says that we can't know anything. I mean, I don't know if it's even useful to have a discussion with that kind of person. But generally I think these arguments I think they make atheism irrational. I mean, I can make that strong claim. I think it's irrational. In light of these arguments, atheism is irrational. I would make that kind of a bold statement. Yeah.
Okay. So, Sharif, how was prayer?
Yeah, good, man. I was just obviously I had to go and pray, so I couldn't hear the discussion. So, have you convinced him yet about belief in a God yet?
Oh, I'm there with a necessary being.
Does a necessary being? Do you believe the necessary being has
stage 2, brother?
Do you believe that a necessary being needs to have a will?
No.
Can you explain?
Yeah, go
explain why not.
Jake.
I don't think reality has a will. Reality, to me, is the causal necessary principle for the existence of the universe. So, with reality is the equivalent to God. Reality causes. I wouldn't use the word created, but I would use the word causes. Matter, space, time, consciousness, all those things. I've been looking into something called neutral monism. Are you guys familiar with that?
Yes, but what do you mean by reality causes?
Reality.
What is reality in that? Is it just like a? I mean, what is reality in that equation?
A plane of existence where every contingent thing is derived from.
But you understand that the term existence is a predicate. It's something that you give as a property of a being. It's not something that exists.
So I can't use existence as a noun.
Well, and the way you're using it as well.
As an you're using it as an adjective, isn't it?
Well, yeah, okay.
And I guess you could also, this is still just referring to the fact that anything that has existence, you're sort of putting it into that. But we've already spent a bit of time discussing why there's a distinction, and you've already conceded to this. There's a distinction between two different kinds of existence, that being possible existence or contingent being, and the necessary being. So when you're describing existence in the way you are, you're just putting all of these things into one category, despite there being a huge distinction between that which gives rise to possible existence and the thing that's making them come into being itself. So you've already said that there is a necessary being. And to say, well, existence doesn't have a will, that's to completely forget all the argumentation that's been leading up to this distinction between different kinds of existent beings, that is necessary and possible. And to say, well, this as a whole can't have a will. We've not been arguing for that. We've admitted, yes, there is this thing called existent beings. Now, if you go into that bubble of things, are there different kinds of existent beings? Yes, there's a necessary being and there's a possible being, or possible beings, plural. And we're saying that the necessary has to have a will, and we gave the reasoning there. So if this necessary being is independent, yet it is bringing things into being, there is this strange occurrence here of the lack of causality, in the sense that this being isn't being acted upon in the same way. So I know you're a determinist, yeah? Are you still there?
I've moved on that too.
Alhamdulillah. But even if you were to argue...
Let me just clarify real quick. I am a hard incompatibilist in the same sense as Jake.
You're always going hard,
we just sit on different ends of the spectrum. I am a hard incompatibilist that negates free will, that leans towards determinism, negates free will and or moral responsibility.
Okay. Right,
but you understand, just in that when you say existence is the necessary existence, you're using existence there as an adjective. Exactly, it doesn't make sense when you say existence.
No, but reality is. So what I would need to do is find a way to separate reality from existence, find a distinction between those two things, because I'm not necessarily trying to say that existence is existence or reality is reality.
Yeah, exactly.
The way you
so even if I turn around, if I say reality is that which exists as either a possible existence or a necessary existence, which I think what Yusuf was saying before, then yes, that's what we agree, that reality is that which exists as a possible existence or as a necessary existence. Now, all we're saying is, okay, you've got possible existence which are possible and need to be actualized to have a particular attribute, or that they began to exist, and a necessary existence which is eternal, which had to do the actualizing. Now, the actualizing or the causing of these possible things, it required a choice. Otherwise, these possible things are no longer possible. They're necessary as well.
And also,
not only that, yeah, go, sorry, Yusuf.
And also, so the idea that existence doesn't necessarily have to have a will, we're conceding that with the idea that possible existence can have a will and cannot have a will. Mm-hmm. That is, some of possible existent beings.
So by possible existence, you mean contingent beings?
Yeah. So they can be, their non-existence is not inconceivable. Yeah. So that, these things can come into being and they can cease to be. They can originate.
I can concede that they have a will. I would just say that their will isn't derived from free choice. Like their will.
Right, but then that complicates it even further, because if you want to say, because I'm saying that there are things like a stone doesn't mm-hmm. necessarily have a will. I'm happy to concede that. Mm-hmm. We can go down this route of panpsychism and things like that, but I'm happy to say that there are things in existence that don't have a will. Mm-hmm. And if you're saying that, then we can say, it's not necessarily the case that existence has to have a will. Well, because we can point at things in reality that don't have a will. And so that's fine. But then again, we've already made a distinction between the possible and the necessary. And the only reason you can say, well, reality doesn't necessarily have to have a will, that's a consequence of this understanding that, well, possible existence may not have a will. And so therefore you can infer from that to the idea that quote unquote reality doesn't have a will. But then all you're talking about here is the set of contingent things. And you're not seeing that we've already made a distinction between that set and the necessary existence. Mm-hmm. And so then when we're talking about the necessary existence, there is no other way of explaining this other than having the ability to choose. There's nothing acting upon it, making it do anything. Whatever actions are coming from it, whatever effects come from it, are self-determined. And this is about as free as a will as you're going to get. And then on top of that, with what you've just said, can you repeat what you just mentioned there about you can imagine these things as having a will, but
a deterministic will. Basically, I have a will that's derived from a arena of faculties of external factors like my existence, my brain, my parents, my society, everything like that brings me to figure out what I like, what I don't like, what I think is right and wrong, true and false. Okay. All of those things are from external factors, which are influences that could have caused me to believe that something is right or wrong.
But this is great though, bro, because for us, not for you, because if you're willing to concede here that all of these things, despite being determined, have will, then you have to admit that whatever this necessary being is has a will that is not determined, therefore has a free will. Because if you're willing to acknowledge
if it's determined by other causes and this necessary being is independent, there's no other causes determining it.
Is this necessary being bound by his nature? For example, can this necessary being you guys are speaking about, can it lie? Can it sin? Can it choose? Well, I'm not going to say choose not to exist because that's kind of stupid, but can it do those things? Like it's bound by its own nature, which means there's some deterministic attributes there.
See, I would say this. I would say the problem with those types of questions is that it sort of goes a bit too further to where we're at. Mm-hmm. So we're at a being, and then we're trying to say, okay, does a necessary being, is it some sort of mechanical force within the universe that has no consciousness, no will, and therefore was forced to create? So we're trying to move the discussion from there to a will, and then we can start talking about other properties. And I mentioned the point. I said, if we say reality exists, we're saying, reality is reality. We're saying reality is either a contingent being and a necessary being, isn't it? And we're saying, well, contingent beings don't explain their own existence. A necessary being does explain its own existence by necessity. It has to exist independently. And that the necessary being causes the contingent beings to exist. Yeah. Now, that causal relationship, is it something that is forced or compelled upon the necessary being, like a mechanical force? Now, if it's forced or compelled, the problem is that then the possible beings have to have always existed, because everything sufficient for the necessary being to bring the effect into being or cause the effect always exists.
I agree.
Yeah. So therefore, if the effect comes in at a point in time or begins, then it means that the necessary being, having all of these necessities, you know, not having anything external to itself, the only explanation we have open to us is that it chose. And this like goes back to that example I gave earlier. I don't know if you heard the example of SETI, you know, search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The reason why they look for it, how they look for intelligence, is they say, is there a signal in the universe that doesn't have a naturalistic origin, that cannot be explained by some physical law? If there's something that cannot be explained by physical law, then it's an indication of intelligence. Yeah. And we're saying that this necessary being doesn't depend upon any physical laws outside of itself. It therefore chooses to create possible beings.
So basically what you're saying is that we're on the same page with a necessary being. We're on the same page with an eternal causal principle for the universe itself, for existence itself. You're saying that for things to change or for something to be caused, there needs to be a will implemented with this necessary being to be able to change the state of something.
So Justin,
if reality...
Also,
go ahead.
I was going to say, we also agree that contingent things began to exist, don't we?
Yes.
Okay, so we agree there's a necessary eternal cause and there's an effect of contingent beings which began to exist. Yeah. Now, if we explain the necessary being as a mechanical force, then if the cause is eternal, the effect would be what?
If the cause is eternal, the effect would be non-eternal.
No, it would be eternal. If everything sufficient to cause an effect exists, then you're going to have an effect, isn't it?
I thought you meant the creation itself would be eternal. I'm like, no, the creation, like we are the effect of what's necessary being caused. So we would be contingent at that point.
Right. So the point here is this is one of four arguments we mentioned here, but this one argument is saying, okay, if you've got an eternal cause that has no choice to create, then the effect would have to be
eternal.
Exactly. But because we have not an eternal effect, we have a temporal effect, then what can we say about the eternal cause then? Didn't have to create, did it? It did not have to cause the effect. just repeat after me. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, right. I already got to pull it up right here on my other monitor.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And you guys have been talking to me about this for months, and I've just been able to wrap my head around it. And to be completely honest, look up arguments to completely tear this down.
Yeah,
I've yet to find any, but you know, that's
just one argument. Remember, the other arguments as well, Justin, are like, for example, you know, after last time's show, we had discussions. You had discussion with Haatim and the other brothers here as well about consciousness. And we agree, and you've now you've rejected materialism. I think you're still on that, aren't you? So you rejected materialism. You believe consciousness cannot be explained by physicality or physicalism. There must be something that is external to the material realm that caused consciousness.
You take a baby steps towards a shahada here, Justin.
Yeah. So I'm just saying is that
slowly.
There's so many different ways of looking at this question. All of them seem to always point to a necessary being that has conscious awareness of what it did, or what it caused. Yeah. I don't want to push it, Justin, because I know it's a
have a think about it, bro. Let it.
I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about it.
Couple more days.
Yeah,
so
don't be afraid to keep pushing.
So Justin, remember this argument does not necessarily lead you to Islam. It leads you to theism. But the next step about Islam, and there's a few steps, but one of the key steps would be, is what religion best explains this necessary being? Yeah. So which divine can, lots of people claim to have received this revelation from this necessary being that has a will, consciousness, intelligence, that created through intentionality. What best explains it?
Well, that's an easy step. That's an easy step that I've already been doing. I mean, I've already been on that step as an atheist. Like, as an atheist, you can even do that. Use the process of elimination, looking at other religions and seeing like, oh boy, this ain't gonna work. This ain't gonna work at all.
Yeah.
So I've already kind of been doing that, and like I said, the few that are left are Judaism and Islam.
Yeah.
So how do we push Judaism out of this?
Well, before we do that, I mean, we have to get you to agree that the necessary being is God, or at least something like it, if you're not fine with the word God. But
to be honest, it sounds like he's already there. Like, if he's saying now it's either Judaism or Islam, then I think at the moment
I want you to take your shahada right now. But then
he's got to change empathetic atheist.
No, he's got to take the hat off, man. Just all right.
So Justin, you do realize, right, Justin, that there are. I just think you have to know. I think you do know this, but you have to take into consideration that there are responses to these arguments from the atheist side. There's a lot of back and forth, right? So it's not like. Right? It's not like there isn't a discussion to be had, but what we're telling you is that all in all, this is a very strong case. And I would argue that based on all this evidence, even if I'm making a weaker case, that it is just rational. There is some rationale to believe in God. Let's say, I think the stronger case is very doable, that God does exist, a deductive case. But even if I'm making the weaker case that there is a rationale to believe in God, and that there's this kind of like epistemic permissiveness in this whole atheism-theism discussion, that there is a rational basis through which you can adopt theism, and your worldview as an atheist entails that the truth about these existential and philosophical questions, in the absence of the existence of God, doesn't even matter. I mean, it's like truth. Your truth-bearing faculties can be good in terms of your survivability and in terms of benefiting you here and now. But in terms of these, complex and deep existential questions, in the absence of the existence of God, the truth of these questions or propositions is literally meaningless in that bigger nihilistic picture of atheism. So keeping that in mind and looking at the other side and saying, hey, there's a rational basis from that, yet choosing to remain as an atheist when it doesn't even matter if you're an atheist on atheism is quite irrational. It's straightforwardly irrational, I think. Right. So yeah, man, go for it.
I've purchased tickets to go to the Faithless Forum in June, so I have to hold on for a couple more. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I think you should.
They allow theists there. Don't worry, Justin.
I know. You could be repping it for our side when you go there.
Yeah, just piss all the YouTubers off.
But so can we just ask now? So have you moved from at the beginning of the stream saying that the necessary cause doesn't have a will to accepting that there is a good case to say that it does?
I'm accepting that there is a good case to say that it does.
Yeah. That's all we're asking. So
there's also a good case to say that we can't show that other minds exist. But I mean, I don't think any of us here are solipsists. So that's going to be something to sit down and think on.
All right. But the question is is that a problem you inclined to? Do you doubt the existence of your children?
Say that again?
Do you doubt the existence of your children when you look at them?
No.
So it's not really a problem for you?
No.
All right, so we don't even need to cover that.
He's saying that if you use the same epistemic approach, justification towards other minds, for example, our children, then we can use the same principle when it comes to the necessary being.
I have a daughter. There's no amount of argumentation that people are going to be able to give me that's going to doubt whether or not my daughter is another mind and can experience pain in order for me to kind of neglect or disregard pain being caused on her by someone.
Or being skeptical either.
Yeah. There's zero skepticism with regards to the existence of my daughter and that she is another mind and that she is capable of experiencing pain. Mm-hmm. And like, I'm heavily convinced of that. And that, like, I don't care. And I know how deep into these philosophical labyrinths we can get and how confusing things can become when you ponder on them a little too much. But it's in the same way as when you're looking at words and they cease to stop looking like words. I make it equivalent to that. For me, there isn't a problem with other conscious. I think you exist. I think you are a being. I think we are having a back and forth now. And there's things rattling in your mind, there's things rattling in our mind, and we're enjoying each other's company. I don't think there's a problem with that. And so that would only be an issue if you even considered that seriously. But I really don't think you do. So I really don't think this is an impediment to anything that we've given you so far. So then I kind of just put it to you again. Like, so are you moving from the stage of accepting that there's at least good arguments? I'm not telling you, right, Shahada time. I'm just saying, is there a good argument to suggest that this necessary being has a will, is self-determined, and not acted upon from external causes? Do you think we've made that position well? And are you at least willing to sort of move
I
into
concede to that? You have good arguments to show that the necessary being has a will.
Okay, alhamdulillah. So that's I guess one step closer to the Shahada, at least.
I've been moving quickly lately. Damn.
You have. These conversations of ours.
Got rid of materialism, got rid of determinism.
But like I say,
moved to deism.
I think it's something to dwell on for a little bit. Let it marinate. Like I say, you're making progress, alhamdulillah, and I think, inshallah.
I'm just trying to be open-minded.
Yeah. No, that's good. Don't worry. And I think, like I say, I'm enjoying our conversations, and I think all the other brothers do as well. So just keep at it.
We'll talk about this again, Justin. I want to talk to you about the modal epistemological argument. Sounds fancy, right? But it can be relevant because it's it has to do with how even if our advancement develops, no matter what situation you're in, you know, your epistemic position can't really change with regard to your position on an agent that caused the existence of the universe. It's not going to change. It's so we can have that discussion too. Cool. And
Sharif, you missed it. I said my Shahada while you were gone.
I was listening. You know, the problem is, for some reason on this stream, I can't hear Abdulrahman. So every time he speaks, I have to put my YouTube on to listen to him.
Jump out and jump back in.
Maybe I'll try that.
It'll take a second. Do it now. Just leave studio and join again.
I might miss Justin's Shahada though.
that ain't happening today, but I won't say that it won't happen in the future.
Inshallah. We'll keep you in our prayers. May Allah guide you to
Any last words, Justin, that you want to say or anything that?
No, I normally end my shows a certain way, but I'm not gonna say that on your show.
I don't think I'll call it the very end of your show, so I have no idea.
I always say, have a good night, stay home, stay safe, and let's make America secular again.
All right, bro.
What I would say. But thanks for having me on, guys, and we'll be on. I guess next time you come on, I'll try and jump on with you.
Thanks a lot, Justin.
It's always a pleasure, Justin. Take care. Alhamdulillah, that was I think a brilliant. Oh no, he's gone to try and jump back in again, hasn't he? Yeah, alhamdulillah, I think that was great progress. Any thoughts about before we bring on the next guest? What we were just talking about. Brother Jake, I want you to say something because we've kind of been bullying you into silence by accident.
No, that's all right. I mean, I talk to Justin quite frequently, so we've been back and forth on some of these arguments, and I think he's moving, sort of inching closer and closer. And I'm sure we'll talk to him off air some more about this. But I think it's a good thing.
Inshallah. Right, we've got Brother Sharif back. And now we're going to bring on brother Call to Truth. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. How you doing? You're on mute. You're mute, bro. Let me message him.
Is Karlos
not there? Not yet. Not yet. How you doing, bro? Would you prefer to me just refer to you as Call to Truth?
لا, it's okay. Assalamu alaikum. How are you doing, akhi?
Alhamdulillah, nobody.
Alhamdulillah. How are you doing, brothers?
Alhamdulillah.
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 So,
I was listening to the... Yes.
Yeah, go on. What contribution would you like to make?
I was listening to Justin. There was another argument you could have used for reaching this conclusion that the creator must have a will. Of course, there is the obvious argument that there is a change in the world, and there are things coming into existence and others going out of existence. There are contingent things, so there must be the will of the creator who is changing these things and who is bringing these things into existence. So if the creator didn't have a will, nothing would occur in the world and nothing would continue to exist in the world. So that is that's a correct approach. But then, this is one aspect of this argument, which some skeptics might come with the kind of contention or the counter argument that how do we know that it is a will? Why shouldn't it be a naturally moving agent? Because as you know, there is things that move by their nature, and there are things which move by their will. So, for example, if you lift up a rock and you leave it to fall down, it falls by its nature. It doesn't fall by a will. So some atheists and agnostics might come with this contention that why shouldn't the creator be something like a machine or like a non-living? Yes.
Do you mind if I just try and answer that? So I would say that these things are not moving by their nature as though they're independent beings. So the only reason a rock would fall if you lift it is because of its relation to other things that are around it, that it is in relation to, and which I guess you could say, the forces that are causing, for example, gravity here, in the case of the rock falling, these forces themselves are caused by something that is the objects that the rock is finding itself on. So Earth, in this example.
I tend to agree that things that move by their nature, they require some kind of external maintenance. Like, for example, a rock wouldn't fall down unless somebody lifts it up. You see, that kind of has to be some kind of input. But there is this, basically the atheists, they have this, I think it's useful in this context to point out that there is that the perfection of Allah, the perfection of God, requires that He has a will. So if Allah is known to have created willing things that have will and things that act by their nature, then a fortiori, God is going to have is more deserving of will. You see, so
brother, that's one argument, but I think there's a more foundational point here. So let's say there aren't any external factors and this rock moves from within its own nature. There seems to be a premise that's kind of snuck in there that the rock doesn't have a will, and this again takes us back to the problem of other minds, right? So if we can see that something does move of its own nature, which we don't normally see, we see that in our own acts of will. But if we can see, let's say in the case of quantum fluctuations, I know that this isn't the case and that there is a cause, but let's assume for the sake of argument that something happens with no apparent, immediately acting cause on the event. Well, what makes you say that this thing is not the result of a willful, intentional agent? Because it's kind of exactly the same thing you see when another creature that we actually know has a will when you see that creature behaving in a non-deterministic manner that indicates that it's not just merely reacting on the physical stimuli that surrounds it, you infer that it has a will. So why are we assuming that this rock or the quantum fluctuation, even though they're both not the best examples because there are physical surroundings that make them behave the way they do, but let's say there aren't, then why are we assuming there isn't no will that's acting upon that? If we reach the edge of the universe, if there is an edge, and we see things just popping into existence, right, with no cause whatsoever, why are we assuming that this is just something coming out of nothing or something behaving naturalistically instead of assuming that it is the result of some kind of will? Because we do infer a will about things that kind of behave in a similar manner. So
yes, well, I'm just pointing out that they might have this contention.
I don't think the contention works.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. I agree with the claim that it is impossible for things for a self-determining thing to be to be a natural agent or to not have will or to have volition. The creator must have will. It's of his perfection, and everything which he creates is subject to his creative agency. So that's enough evidence that the natural things, they are dependent on a willing creator. But I'm just saying that I've heard some people, they use this contention. They might say,
and I agree with your argument, by the way. So I think it's a very good point. I just wanted to say the supreme nature.
Yeah, call to truth. If you heard at the beginning of the stream when I went through this point, I said there's 4 arguments that we can use. One of the arguments that you mentioned there, which is arbitrary limits, because if you turn around and say this necessary being doesn't have consciousness, but other things have consciousness within the universe, then you're creating an arbitrary limit that needs an explanation. Why does it not have a consciousness when other things do have consciousness? So then this no longer becomes a necessary independent being, but rather dependent upon some other explanatory factor. Yeah, so that's one of the arguments, and it fits in with what you're talking about in terms of maximally perfect being as well. Because in essence, what you're saying is something that's unlimited, independent in all its respects, shouldn't have any arbitrary limits to limit it in one way or another. The other arguments that we mentioned was consciousness, the fact that consciousness cannot be grounded upon materialism. The other argument that I mentioned is about contingency, the fact that things are possible and they need something to actualize one possibility over another possibility. And the third, the final one that I mentioned it's all in reverse order actually, because this is the first one I mentioned, was the fact that the universe or contingent things had a beginning to their existence, and the necessary being is eternal. So even if somebody turns around and says, I don't think this particular argument is compelling, that doesn't refute all of the other arguments. That's just one aspect of the argument. There are those other aspects of the argument as well. And even, people talk about the design of the universe, the complexity
that's even
of nature.
Evidence, like the arguments from design, they indicate that there is intentional creativity.
Yeah, that's right. So there's numerous ways of tackling this. And I think for an atheist, when you look at the body of evidence and the body of arguments, even if they have a contention on one of those arguments, the body of the arguments itself is collectively proof, definitively, in my view, that
there is something you said, Sharif. There is something you said in the beginning, and I just wanted to give my take on it. Yeah, it's not totally related to this topic, but I don't know. Do you mind if I speak about something which is a little bit on a tangent, or?
Yusuf's not here, so he can't stop you.
Okay, so you were mentioning that some of the like you were mentioning that the attributes or the properties in creation, that they're kind of they're contingent, and that they are therefore going to be in need of the external
of an explanation.
External explanation who determines it one way or another. And I basically agree that everything in the world is created. So the tree is created, the human being is created. Everything is a sign of the creator. It's originated and it is contingent. But basically, I part ways in that I believe that some of its attributes are possible to its existence, whereas other attributes are necessary to its existence. So this is, I believe, was Ibn Taymiyyah's position regarding the claim that there are certain cases he mentions, where it's one has to be careful not to say that a specific attribute, to say that anything is possible. You know what I'm saying? Like you say, it's this size, so it could be in another size. I can conceive of it, therefore it is logically possible. This, I think, is a bit too hasty, and this is where people make mistakes when they speak about the fine-tuning arguments. Sometimes they forget to use the very origination of the world as an evidence, and they cling on to something which is quite. We don't know, for example, whether this property it's necessary to the existence of the universe or whether it is contingent. So they might start thinking about start labeling them as contingent, whereas they might in fact be necessary to their existence. Not that they are not created in the universe; they are all created because everything in the world is created. But some things, like their non-existence in their creations, in the creations, would entail a logical contradiction. You see what I'm saying? Like, for example, when you take the power of the human being, it's very much it's clear that it is not necessary to the existence of the human being, because sometimes the human being is powerful and at times he is weak. Or take, for example, the arrangement.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is essential attributes, aren't you? Such that thing which does not exist means that the substance itself doesn't exist. Is that what you're referring to?
I'm referring to sifat lazima, or I don't know what they call it. I wouldn't take the I'm just saying that there are some things which are necessary. Like, for example,
sifat lazima is essential attributes. Right?
Sifat lazima,
and there is
essential attributes, which is like things which are accidental. So
substance and accidents,
Yes, so not everything. So basically, Ibn Taymiyyah, he believed that there are some arrangements in nature. The substance of these arrangements is necessary to these arrangements, such that if there is any disassembly, the very substance will change.
But the substance in and of itself is not necessary.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's a problem with language. The terminology that you're using is not how it's really used typically in a discussion. I mean, if it's these things are essential attributes, that's fine. Given the fact we can say they're contingently necessary in that sense, in order for the thing to be what it is. But it's not necessary in and of itself, meaning that God didn't have to create that thing. He could have created something else, or didn't create the thing at all.
Yes.
It's cold to truth. I gave two explanations of what I meant by contingent. That which did not necessarily have to exist. It could have existed, could not have existed. And secondly, is that could have had other attributes. So I am aware that there is something called essential attributes, such that if that thing did not have those particular attributes, it would no longer be that thing in itself.
Yes.
And then there are other attributes which are
the lack of these attributes would be logically impossible.
It's not that they're logically impossible; they're logically impossible to the definition of the thing.
No, I'm saying that it would entail a contradiction for a lazima attribute. So, for example, when we speak about Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, His attributes, they are His attributes of perfection. They are never to be lacked, because Allah is maximally perfect. So His attributes, is lazima to Him, meaning that their non-existence, it would entail the non-existence of Allah, which is logically impossible. This is what I mean by lazima. So it would entail a contradiction for the attribute to not exist in the subject of its attribution.
Yeah, but we have to distinguish between the conversation about God and then the conversation about created things and their attributes. So I thought you were focusing on the things that are created that are not speaking about God, but now you're shifting the conversation to God and His attributes. So,
no,
which one are we trying to deal with?
Deal with the creation. Yeah, the creation is.
So, do you think that anything in the creation and its attributes are necessary in and of themselves?
I don't know. I believe that the creation is not necessary in and of itself. So creation is dependent and is contingent.
Well, then, yeah, that's all we're saying.
Yes, but I'm saying that one has to take care when arguing for Allah's existence, not to point out an attribute in the creation which might be necessary to the existence.
Yeah, brother. So if you say the definition, so for example, the definition of a married person, it is essential that this person is not a bachelor, because a married bachelor would be a contradiction. But that doesn't mean that the existence of the married person, along with his properties, is a metaphysical necessity, right? So you're talking about like some sort of an analytic concern with you know, definitionally true propositions, that if they didn't have certain aspects or certain properties about them, then the proposition would be contradictory. We don't deny that. But what we're talking about is more of a metaphysical necessity, a concrete metaphysical necessity that explains reality.
I don't really understand. What do you mean by
because we're distinguishing between as we said, the essential attributes. Now that God has created everything that He has, a bachelor and how it's defined has a certain definition, but God didn't have to create bachelors at all. I mean, the concept is not necessary in and of itself. That's the distinction we're making. So I'm wondering if you think there's anything outside of God that He has created that is necessary in and of itself. If not, then I don't see what the hang-up is.
No, there is nothing.
I think call to truth. I mentioned the point. I talked about the red triangle. I said for it to have three sides is necessary for its own definition, but for it to be red. So I understand and appreciate your point, and Jazakallah khair for highlighting it. But I was aware that there is something called essential properties or essential definitions, such that if it did not exist, the thing itself would not exist, and we wouldn't call it by what it is. And that there are those properties.
The context of this idea is that you know, the Ash'ariyya, they had this argument. That I'll just give you the context quickly before I go out, so you can continue with the next caller, inshallah. But the Ash'ariyya, they had this argument that, basically, Ibn Taymiyyah, he is arguing that God's existence can be argued from the argument from causation, which is that things originate. The trees originate, the human beings originate, everything in the world is originating, and that therefore there must be an eternal originator. And he says that this is clearer than the argument from contingency, which is, although he accepts both, which is that they are contingent and that they therefore depend on a necessary being. But he defines origination in a different way. So he argues that origination is to create things out of matter. That's when things originate. So a tree is originated when it comes out of matter, such that the matter totally changes. One thing perishes and another thing comes into existence. That's his idea about origination. But then he speaks about the Ash'ariyya when they were arguing against, they were arguing for Allah's existence using the argument called the argument from specification. They would say that physical bodies, that's their argument, physical bodies, they have size and measure. And these sizes and measures, it's conceivable that they could be bigger or smaller than they are, you see? So they say, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were located above the heavens in the way that Ibn Taymiyyah was arguing, so if he were above the heavens, or he was had a tremendous extent and these meanings, then it would be possible for him to be smaller or larger. That's what they said. You see what I'm saying? So Ibn Taymiyyah, he responds by saying that this attribute of greatness of Allah is maximally perfect, and it could not be in any way different. So the attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is of Allah's greatness is necessary to his existence. It can't be any way different. And he then moves on to say that there are, this is also in creation. Some creations, their measure is not going to be, is not necessary to their existence. Some of their measures are necessary to their existence. So there are certain creations which have to be in certain ways, such that if they were greater, they would be, it would entail a contradiction. See, so that's
the thing. I think I still don't understand. I understand how if they were different, greater or smaller in the way that you're framing it, it may be something different. It may be it may entail that it's a different thing. But why would the thing in and of itself be necessary? If it's not necessary in and of itself, then the properties of it aren't necessary.
Yes, I'm not saying that the thing. I'm saying that the attributes of the measure, the size. So, for example, a water molecule.
Why is any size whatsoever necessary?
I'm not saying it's necessary. I'm saying it's necessary to the existence of the subject of its attribution, such that
it's just. I mean, I just think that the language you're using is very sloppy, and it's not really being described appropriately. You're just describing essential attributes, and then you're using the word necessary, and it's not appropriate. I mean, that's as far as I understand you properly.
I'm saying that some things in nature, we shouldn't be too hasty to say that just because we can conceive of something, that means it's logically possible. So in order to know that something is logically possible, we have to have some kind of evidence.
Brother, let me just settle this.
It's the other way around. It's the other way around. In order to claim that something is necessary, it couldn't be any other way. And I'm still trying to understand how anything you're describing is necessary. I don't understand that.
I'm not describing the subject of attribution as necessary. So I'm not saying.
Okay, there's two things. There's the substance and there's the attributes, the things that are predicated of it. Which one of those are you saying are necessary?
I'm saying that both are created. So both are. When I say it's necessary, I'm just pointing out. When I'm saying that the accident is necessary, I'm just pointing out that it could. Given the existence of that subject of attribution, the accident can't be different.
Yes, but that just means that it's contingently necessary. It's not necessary in and of itself. By the fact that it exists the way it does. For example, water is H2O.
Yes.
By the way that we understand and we know that, it couldn't exist without hydrogen, of course. But the water molecule of H2O is not necessary. It's only contingently necessary because it's been created. But it didn't have to be that way.
Do you mind if I just jump in? So the conversation is a very interesting one. I think we're kind of moving a bit off the topic of the subject of the stream a little bit. Do you mind if we wrap this up here? And inshallah, if we want to continue the conversation, we can maybe do this offline. Inshallah. And
sure. Jazakallah khair for the efforts, brothers. Wallah, this is good.
No, Jazakallah khair for coming on. It's been interesting talking to you as always, brother. And inshallah, maybe we can try and arrange for a little conversation after the stream at some point in the future. Inshallah. But barakallahu fiqh. And we'll speak to you again soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So we've got the next guest coming on, the legendary Karlos, who we have had on previously. Hello there, Karlos. How are you?
Hello. Don't try and big me up too much.
How you doing, dude?
I'm good. Yourselves, guys? You right?
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah, okay. Karlos, we've already had one atheist change his views on the channel. So, so we're hoping for a 2 for 2.
All right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I have missed some of the conversation, so I hopefully you won't have to repeat yourselves too much. I think I've got the general gist of it, and I did watch the part 1 of the stream where you were focusing on more of the stage 1. So I think just to set the scene, I mean, based on the original discussion that you had, I'm pretty much happy with accepting that there has to be something necessary as the cause or the reason for why everything exists. So I'm pretty much happy with stage one. I've not heard all of the arguments for step two. I suppose just from a general standpoint and previous thoughts I've had on this particular question, I don't negate the existence of God or discount it for any reason. I think it's rational to believe that a God is possible, but I also think other possibilities are rational, and I think we kind of have an epistemological problem trying to get to the bottom of ontological conclusions, because we're just bound by that distinction between epistemology and ontology. So I think we're always going to have a problem trying to arrive at suitable conclusions that we can be happy with. All we can do is get to approximations because of the other ontological possibilities that are out there, such as deism, pantheism, naturalistic pantheism, panpsychism, an evil God. There's many different possibilities on an ontological level that could be the answer.
So Karlos, all we want to do is at this moment in time, we want to say, can we go from a necessary being, being here, meaning foundation to reality, a necessary being, to a necessary being that has conscious and chose to create? So that's what we're trying to do. So from what I understand, what you're saying is you are agnostic as to the nature of the necessary being. You believe a necessary foundation to reality exists, but you're agnostic as to whether it is naturalistic or mechanistic, or whether it is a willful agent, what theists would call God. Yeah,
pretty much. And I think with without any evidence to distinguish between the many possibilities, it's going to be difficult to try and come to a decision as to what, you have to be able to rule out the other possibilities with your explanations, I think.
Yeah. So Karlos, really quickly, why did you come to the conclusion of a necessary being in the first place? Very, very briefly.
I think the Kalam cosmological argument is probably among the best types of arguments, contingency argument as well. I think these arguments work very well from a logical point of view, but obviously we're using like empirical knowledge to try and come to ontological conclusions. So I don't think that we can even. We can't. Yes, I accept that there's a necessary existence for everything else to exist. It's just that we can't be settled on those ontological conclusions, and unless we have evidence from an ontological tier of knowledge.
But what we can say, what you are saying, it seems to me, is that okay, whatever begins to exist as a cause, the universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause, and infinite regress is an impossibility. Therefore, there must be something which is independent, eternal, that caused contingent, limited things to exist. That's one formulation of the argument, So we are saying something about, we are giving some sort of ontology to this necessary being. We're saying it's not caused, it's independent, it's eternal, and it had the power to create. These are the things that we're coming to as the logical entailment of the argument, So there are positive things that we are saying about the ontology, the being of this necessary being, So we are saying these things. And the next question is that okay, using basically the same premises of how we came to a necessary being, we're going to use the same premises and say, well, this necessary being, the best explanation or the only explanation is to assign a will, intentionality. And the reason why I would say that is what I said to Justin earlier. I don't know if you heard that conversation with Justin, but I said to him that, look, if you've got everything necessary for an effect to take place, so if everything necessary in a cause exists to cause an effect, and the cause itself is not, has no choice but to cause, then what you're going to have? You're going to have an effect, isn't it? Does that make sense, Karlos? Yeah.
In a deterministic way.
Yeah. Now, if the cause is eternal, what would the effect be?
If the cause was eternal.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the cause, you mean the necessary existence?
Yeah. So everything necessary for this necessary existence to cause its effect exists because it's independent. There's nothing external to it. So if this eternal cause exists and it was compelled to create, then the effect would be what? Would it be temporal or eternal?
Would it be temporal or eternal? I'd say.
Meaning, would it have a beginning or would it always exist?
I think. Well, there's a possibility it could be either, depending on the nature of the necessary existence.
So the necessary existence has to cause. It cannot not cause.
Is that what you believe? Is it?
No. I'm saying from this. I'm using this as an argument to say that if we accept a necessary being does not have a will, meaning it was compelled to have the effect or cause the effect, then for the cause to exist, you would have the effect. Yeah. It would necessitate the effect.
Right.
Yeah, it would necessitate. Yeah. Now, if the cause is eternal, the effect would have to also be eternal. Yeah.
I can see where you're going with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the argument you've already accepted, which is that actually an infinite regress of contingent limited beings is impossible, then we've accepted that contingent beings, which also includes the universe, had a beginning to its existence. It didn't always exist.
Yeah, but I mean, when we say that, we're only talking about our space and our time and our matter within that. So anything outside of that could be subject to different laws.
Yeah, but that's why, Karlos, that's why I asked you the question, why did you come to the conclusion of a necessary being? And you said, well, and we went through very briefly the Kalam cosmological argument and the contingency argument, because both these arguments, they're not necessarily talking about different types of contingency. They're saying all contingent being needs a necessary foundation. The necessary foundation is the cause of all contingent beings. But all contingent beings had a beginning to their existence. So that's what you've agreed with. You've agreed that contingent beings, includes the universe, had a beginning. There's something outside of contingent beings that is the cause which did not have a beginning, is eternal. This eternal cause, exists, but not an eternal effect.
Right. Temporal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's temporal. That's right. So on what basis can you say that the eternal cause is necessitated to cause an effect when the effect is not necessitated in this instance? The effect did not have to exist. The cause did not have to cause the effect. That's what we're coming to in terms of our observation of a temporal contingent universe or existence. The cause did not have to cause. If it did, then the effect would be eternal.
Yeah, I don't know. It's difficult because the whole concept of time becomes very difficult when you're talking about eternal things that are contingent. Because obviously, if you believe that God exists and God is eternal, then you believe in essentially an infinite past, and then that sort of goes outside of our understanding of what time actually is. So when you're saying go on. So when you're saying
I was going to say, Karlos. So I think the point being is that you could still say we sort of agreed upon certain key premises of the argument that an infinite regress is impossible. Yeah. So there can't be an eternal amount of events of limited things, in this chain of series. That's impossible. There's an eternal cause, that started a chain of events. Yeah. Now, if you're like I said, the other way to argue, the other way would be to say, okay, well, the eternal cause was compelled to cause, so therefore it had to cause its effect. So the effect would have to be eternal. Yeah. So that's the other way of arguing it. That's what you would say. Okay, so therefore the universe and contingent things are eternal in infinite regresses exists. That explains, or that allows us to be in this agnostic position of saying, well, is the necessary being a creator or mechanical force? But I'm saying we're not allowed to be in the agnostic position because we've already accepted an infinite regress of contingent beings is impossible. Yeah. So it had a beginning. There's a beginning in the chain. Yeah. Which therefore means it's not eternal. However you want to frame time, relational, idealistic, objective, however you want to frame time, it had a beginning. Yeah. Whereas this cause did not have a beginning. Therefore, the cause was not compelled to cause the effect.
Right. Okay.
That's what we observe. So, like I said, we're already making ontological, positive claims about the ontology of this necessary being, that it's eternal, that it's independent, nothing external to it, that it caused and created contingent things. We're already making that. And I'm saying the other thing that we can make as another property is that the cause, this necessary being, is not compelled to create, which means it chose to create. That's the other attribute and property we would attribute to the necessary being. This doesn't necessarily mean that therefore you need to become Muslim, Karlos. I'm not saying that at all yet. all I'm saying is that it takes you from just being a simple agnostic atheist to somebody who would say that actually theism has a strong rational foundation for it. Yeah. In fact, adopt theism.
I don't know if you can go straight to theism though, because you've still got deism.
Well, if you want deism, yeah, you can argue for deism, yeah, but you're not arguing for atheism anymore. I think Jake wanted to come in. Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, what's the dichotomy that you're drawing between deism and theism?
Well, obviously, with deism, it's to suggest that a God exists, but either doesn't care or doesn't intervene with the natural world or is, human beings or anything like that. So that's the major distinction. So that's what I'm saying. You couldn't jump from the arguments that you've made straight to theism. You'd need a few more steps.
Yeah, we just mean that God exists.
Yeah, but I would even say that it is possible, if we're saying that these things are dependent upon God, that they're permanently dependent, they never become independent from him. And so deism itself, as this position that God creates things and then leaves things to kind of go on without him, is to suggest these things become independent in a way. And I think we've give good arguments to suggest that this is absurd, that these things are dependent upon the thing, that necessary being. And so if you're willing to attribute at least a will to this necessary being, and we can get to the conclusion that it's consistently giving everything that it has to it and sustaining all things constantly during their existence, bringing things into being, taking them out of being, then there is this constant interaction between this necessary being and the things that it's creating and sustaining. And so it becomes, I would say, it ends up being a very difficult position to sort of sustain for the deist at this point. If that is obviously you're willing to concede on the points that all dependent things are dependent on the necessary being, and they are constantly dependent upon him, or it, if you don't want to go as far as saying him. So and in that case, there would need to be extra arguments on behalf of the deist in order to lead us to their conclusion, rather than the theistic one, that is this being that is necessary has a will and is constantly sustaining, that you can infer or tie this notion of constant interaction or care, if you want to use that, although it's obviously in this case would be used in quite a loose term.
See, Carlos, the issue is this, is that in order to adopt the position of theism, yeah, the first discussion has to be, is there a necessary being? Does a necessary being have to exist? The next question then becomes, is this necessary being, does it have a will? Yeah, does it choose to create? Did it have intentionality? And then we can go and move to a discussion of, does it have actuality? You know, is this theistic God, does it have presence within the universe and within our lives? But I'm just saying is that at what position do you think you are in terms of those three? So, Carl, I don't know if Karlos, you're on mute. If you can,
yeah, you've muted.
Sorry, yeah, sorry.
So on those three things, there's a necessary being. That's it. Initially, that's what you said. Then you had a necessary being with a will. Yeah, this is where we were trying to get to. And then obviously the third position would be this God intervenes within the universe. Now, all we're trying to do is get to from number 1 to number 2 at this moment in time.
Yeah, to say it has a will.
Yeah, it wasn't compelled. It wasn't forced to create, because if it was forced, then the universe, then the contingent beings would be eternal.
So you're saying in that case that if the God that you believe in does exist, that he could have existed in the way that you understand him, but chosen not to create our universe. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could have chosen created a different universe. Didn't have to create the universe.
Because if the cause is some kind of mechanistic, deterministic, naturalistic thing, then I mean, how do you explain how you get the temporal effect from the eternal cause? That's the whole question.
Right, I see.
I mean, and even if you went with some type of quantum fluctuation and indeterministic thing, it still would have happened. Even if it happens at a probability, it still would have happened eternally.
Mm.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
otherwise, how do you explain that? How do you explain that change? Even in that, if we're looking at a naturalistic explanation, whether it's deterministic or indeterministic, I still don't see how either one would solve the problem of an eternal effect, cause producing a temporal effect. It doesn't seem to add up.
So what we observe is our universe, which we agree is temporal, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, but we don't have knowledge of anything outside of our time, space, or anything like that. So we don't know if that is temporal or not. So what I'm saying is that there's potentially other steps that we're missing out, and we're jumping straight from, an eternal creator where nothing else outside of it exists.
Do you think it could be matter? Do you think it could be matter? This other thing that we're thinking of?
Potentially, yeah.
So you think matter could exist outside of time and space?
Not our matter, but other matter. Yeah.
I mean, but then in that case, what is this? I mean, other matter, I don't even know what that would look like, what that even would mean.
Define matter. What do you mean by matter exactly? Because if you're saying not our matter and then moving it to this sort of atemporal substance, what is it that it shares with what you're referring to as our matter, so that you can still refer to it with the same concept or term?
So, I mean, obviously, scientists postulate a possibility of a multiverse. So that would be an example of matter that exists outside of our time.
Yeah, but space. Even that matter that they postulate, it's not some like radically different concept. It's just the existence of other possible universes. So, and that's what I think Sharif was trying to point out in the beginning, or question. How did you get to the place from the necessary being to begin with? Because now when we're dealing with the second stage of the cosmological arguments, I feel like we're moving back to the first stage of how we got there to begin with. And if you already conceded on that, I don't see how when we make the secondary points, you're moving back to considering, you know, the sort of preliminary points that got us here. That's the problem I see in this discussion.
Karlos, if I could say something, this thing about matter, some different kind of matter, right? I mean, first of all, I mean that's very vague. I mean, so basically, you're saying something, right? What is this other kind of matter? Well, it could be God. I'm not saying God is made out of matter. What I'm saying is you're basically it's very vague to the extent that it could basically this definition you're postulating could encompass any kind of thing out there. So you're in agreement with us that there is something that is necessary, and you're saying that the nature of this necessary thing, as far as its substance is concerned, is a mystery. Because I mean, saying some other kind of matter is as good as saying it's something that we don't know, right? I mean, I don't know how you'd label it matter if it's completely unlike what we know as matter, right? So what you would say is that it's something else that's natural. And then we would ask the same kind of questions about this natural thing, right? That Sharif was just asking, and that we've been asking this whole stream about the nature of this, what you call a natural thing, and the causal capacity that it has to contain, to create or to cause a contingent world. We'll ask the exact same questions: the eternal cause and the temporal effect. We'll ask about the faculty of will and how it causelessly causes, or just doesn't necessarily mechanistically or deterministically cause. We'll ask about the nature of the contingent world and how the properties that we find in the contingent world are very arbitrary, in the sense that, you know, electrons and protons and stuff have certain charges, and everything is very, you know, arbitrarily limited in terms of its properties, and it's in a very specific way. It's extremely contingent, that it's really shouting for some kind of an explanation. So when we say that that's the nature of the contingent world, and there is a necessary thing that actualized it, and there is an infinite number of possibilities that could have been actualized, we can say that we can infer some aspect of or some faculty of choice there too. So what we're doing is we're agreeing that there is a cause, there is something necessary, and you're agreeing with us. What we are doing is that we are asking further questions about this necessary thing. You're saying that there could be other possibilities that we don't know about, but you could say the same about everything. You could say the same about scientific theories, like the theory of evolution. It could be possible that there are other explanations that we don't have access to right now. But what we're doing is we're working with what we have, and we're making an inference to the best explanation in the weak sense of the argument, or a deductive argument in the stronger sense. But the more compelling aspect here is you know, as opposed to scientific theories and inductive arguments, what we're saying is that this data set that we're working with couldn't possibly change, in the sense that as far as science can take you, your epistemic standpoint is going to be the same with regard to the philosophical questions you ask about these ultimate explanations of this contingent world. They're not going to change in that sense, because you're limited by your observation. So what we're doing is we're saying that this necessary thing that we all agree exists, we're saying that we can use the same reason that we apply to our, you know, inspection of the world in general. We can be consistent in asking similar questions about it, and we can reasonably come to certain conclusions, even if in the weaker sense it's in a, or generally it's in a, within a fallibilistic paradigm, in the sense that, okay, we could be wrong, fine, but I mean, that's not really news, because we could be wrong about anything in a strict epistemic sense, right? But are the explanations good? Are the arguments good enough to at least say that there is a rational basis, there is a rational foundation for reality, in the sense that this the way I'm thinking right now, this line of reasoning I'm giving you, I think you should at least acknowledge that I can be reasonable in reaching these kinds of conclusions from my way of thinking, and from deriving these more generalized principles from the basic epistemology that we use as a whole. So I think that's the broader point here.
Yeah, I think it's, I'm not saying, I mean, I definitely think it's a rational pathway that you're taking. I just think the whole discussion is just only going to bring us to approximations. It's not going to, even if we think we're using rational logic here, then it's not necessarily going to give us answers that we can be certain about, and stop looking for the answer.
Why are you looking for certainty? What other domain of knowledge do you look for certainty in? Like science? Do we speak with certainty when it comes to scientific knowledge?
No, we can't do.
Okay, so that's the point. So why are you willing to accept knowledge in general on fallibilistic grounds, but when it comes to these questions we're asking about ultimate explanations, you're saying no, we have to be 100% certain?
Yeah, because when we're talking about ontology, you need evidence from that tier of knowledge to even be able to have a rational discussion. I mean, if we said like the Matrix was that third domain, that sort of necessary existence, the real world, as it were. If we were like I don't know if you've seen the film, but if we were somehow transported to the real world from this world, we would now be in the realm of evidence from that tier. But we're locked in our reality, so we do have that fundamental problem.
So right now you're talking about our bubble of experience, but then we're going to disagree on what that bubble is. So, for example, a solipsist would say that his bubble of experience is only his first-person perspective, and everything you say about the external world is just meaningless gibberish, right? And then that bubble is going to keep expanding. You're going to say, someone else is going to say, no, it's our immediate experience, and we can't even make inferences to best explanations about unobservable things. Someone else is telling you, he's going to tell you, no, we can make inferences, but let's keep it within the bubble of our universe. And then we're going to ask questions, but what do we mean by our universe? Okay, let's talk about the cosmos. And then someone else is going to say reality, but what is reality? So we're going to disagree on what really constitutes this bubble of experience we're talking about. And what I would say is that there's really no difference. You're just always making claims about reality as a whole, and you do make inferences from the observable to the unobservable all the time. So I don't know why there isn't a very, like, why is there this exception when it comes to the ultimate grounding of reality?
Because, when we're talking about epistemology, we're either locked in our imagination and we can come up with all sorts of explanations for reality and the true nature of reality. We can then go to the second tier and use epistemology. We can use empirical data to back up what our original thoughts were in the first tier. But then when we go and trying to get to this third tier of knowledge, ontology, you're always working from a bottom-up perspective. Yeah,
but Karlos, you already agreed. This is why at the beginning we mentioned certain points. You already agree. We've already gone from contingent realities to a necessary reality. So we're already talking about something that's outside of quote unquote the empirical realm. Yeah, what we can experience. So we've already agreed. Me and you agreed upon that. This is what we agreed upon.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you that question because you arrived at something necessary through supposedly non-empirical means. So you agree with Sharif on that?
Yeah. Yeah, but I did start off by saying that it's just an approximation, just because of our, just limitations on an epistemological level. So even though I accept it makes complete rational sense, and I'm happy to go with that. It is just an approximation, and I'm still open to revision.
Okay, right. But
just bringing it back to the will question. I mean, if we said that the necessary existence or necessary being isn't conscious, it's some form of naturalistic pantheism, would you? And in that scenario, the fact that contingent things that exist came about randomly, for argument's sake, so it could or could not have come about, do you still class that as a will in the same way that you've been talking?
No, because
naturalistic pantheism. Go ahead, Jake.
I mean, even like we explained, I was trying to explain earlier about if it's a naturalistic explanation that's indeterministic, you still have the same problem of explaining how you get the temporal effect from the eternal cause. I mean, I don't see how indeterminism would solve that problem from a naturalistic perspective, because even if it's indeterministic in the sense that it happens with a probability, it still is inevitable to happen nonetheless, in that sense. One of those probabilities is going to happen.
So how do you determine that God isn't deterministic in the same way?
Well, because God has a will, whereas nature doesn't. Or at least in the understanding.
How are you determining that, though?
What's that?
Because contingent beings began to exist. If we accept that if X causes Y and X exists, Y exists, if X is eternal, then Y would be eternal. Yeah, if X exists, that causes Y, but X exists, but Y doesn't exist, then it means that X was not compelled to cause Y.
Right. Is that your justification for saying that necessary existence has a consciousness?
Yeah, that's one of the explanations. One of the evidences that we're using here. We're using 4 different evidences. Yeah, but one of those evidences. Look, all I'm doing, Karlos, is using your premises to your arguments that you've come to the conclusion of a necessary being. Yeah, I've not gone outside of that. And I'm saying, based on those arguments that you already hold on to, whether it's, good explanation, rational explanation, whatever it is, the logical entailment of that would come to the conclusion that the necessary being was not forced or compelled to create by some mechanistic force. Yeah? Because if it did, then the universe and contingent beings would be infinite or eternal. And therefore, there'd be an infinite regression or an infinite sum of events. Yeah, whatever.
You know what I find very interesting, Sharif and Karlos, is that this fact that atheists normally object to, the real sticking point is whether this necessary foundation has a consciousness or a will, right? This is really the main point. What's really interesting about this is that even within our own experience, we can't directly observe these things, and we make inferences about them all the time. It's our innermost human experience, this first person perspective thing we call consciousness. Yet we cannot directly observe it. So for the atheist to say that I'm waiting for empirical evidence to justify the claim that this necessary foundation is conscious and I can't make an inference about it, it's kind of funny, because then we come back here to our reality and your very immediate experience. You couldn't possibly reduce and deconstruct this phenomenon of consciousness and show me how it works. Yet when I make a similar inference about the necessary foundation of reality and give you similar reasons in the way I infer its will and its consciousness to the way we always do infer wills and consciousness about beings around us, somehow there's a problem. Why? Because I can't see it? Well, you already agree it exists. So forget about like the substance of it or how it works or any of that, because we aren't making any specific claims about that. We're saying that something exists. And in the same way I infer a will and a consciousness with regard to you, I do the same with regard to this necessary foundation. There's literally no difference, and nothing about me observing this necessary foundation will change anything about that inference, because we know there are serious discussions right now among scientists and philosophers about panpsychism. They're trying to tell you that everything around you is conscious. So the whole topic of what constitutes consciousness isn't exactly that straightforward anyway, and you have to sort of philosophize about it. So if we make a consistent inference from our immediate experience about the way consciousness and free will works and the way intentionality works to this necessary foundation without necessarily having to, examine it directly, we're not really doing anything different than what we do within our, immediate experience in day-to-day lives, even at a very sophisticated philosophical and scientific level.
Yeah, to talk about examining it, sort of, I guess, misunderstands what consciousness is exactly. Because again, like as you were saying there, how do we examine consciousness necessarily? Even when we're talking about ourselves, this is a proper pickle subject. There was only the other day I was watching quantum biology or quantum physics in biology, like a stream, and the second they get onto the topic of consciousness, onto the topic of life, they start alluding to these funny words like, oh, you know, it's like magic to us. Oh, it's let's not go there. Or, you know, they make references to these issues when it comes to talking about what consciousness is exactly. And so, like, I don't know how we would expect to apply this method if it doesn't even apply very well here when we're talking about us. Yet we all have this intuitive understanding of what consciousness is. Or intentionality, like how we engage with things, I guess, and trying
Karlos,
to then, sorry, go on.
So I was going to ask Karlos, how would you normally infer somebody's has intentionality? Because maybe that's what will help explain what through their actions.
And if we can try and wrap up as well, because we're moving on to 2 hours and 20 minutes now, and we've got three more guests we want to try and get on as well, inshallah.
Yeah, sure.
And then
so what Yusuf and Abdulrahman mentioned is he said that, look, it's not just through their actions, is it? For example, if you know you've got that test where you put the hammer to the knee, and your knee, automatically shoots up. It's a reflex test that the doctors do to check your reflexes. Yusuf's looking at me like confused, and he's thinking, "What's he talking about?"
No, I was reading the comments. I wasn't even looking at you.
But you know the test, though, don't you? Yeah.
Say it again. What test?
The little hammer that the doctor does, and he taps your knee, and your knee moves. Your foot moves up.
Yeah. I was doing it with my daughter the other day, but she goes in with a hammer like an absolute maniac and just starts absolutely leathering money.
So Karlos, it's not just action, is it? It's more than just action. It's the fact that the action that the person performs, or the quote-unquote object performs, has no naturalistic explanation. There's nothing external to it, like the forces of nature, that can explain why it performed the action. Would that be correct to say? That's how we understand intentionality.
Okay, I could work with that.
Yeah. So, for example, if I start hearing the knock on this door, then I know that the door's not causing the knocking. I know that the explanation is not contained within a naturalistic framework. There must be somebody causing the knocking behind the door. Yeah. I know the door has not always been knocking. If the door has always been knocking, I'll be thinking there's something wrong with the door. That's why it's always making this sound. Yeah. The fact that it sometimes knocks and sometimes doesn't knock indicates to me some sort of intentionality, particularly if I cannot explain it within a physicalist or materialistic paradigm. Yeah. So somebody knocks on that door. That knocking, therefore, for me, allows me to understand intentionality. Yeah, I can understand intentionality. There's a temporal event. There is something which cannot be explained by the physical contingent beings. Therefore, there must be something other than the physical contingent beings that caused the knocking. The only explanation we have is something called intentionality. That's how we understand human beings are intentional and have will and consciousness. Yeah. Now, what ontology that person who's causing the knocking on the door, what color eyes that person has, how tall that person is, it a man, is it a woman? I can't come to that conclusion just from the knocking. Yeah. But I can come to the conclusion that something exists, something's causing the knocking, and it has intentionality. Yeah. And that's all we're doing when it comes to the observation of the universe. We're looking at the implication of the observed event. We're saying we're seeing contingent beings. Contingent beings are not eternal. They don't always exist. They don't have to exist. They need an explanation outside of itself. That explanation is a necessary being, and the necessary being does not have any explanation outside of itself. It's independent, completely independent, and it causes things which don't have to exist and are temporal. They began to exist. So we are seeing the same thing. We're seeing intentionality, like the knocking on the door. Now, other properties about this necessary being, whether you want to say it's a good God or all these types of, these are separate discussions that we can have. But at the very least now we've come to a conclusion that a necessary being had intentionality, had will.
Yeah, no, I think you made some good points. As the one that Jake mentioned about the move from maternal to temporal, that link, that's something I hadn't thought about before, and I will go away and ponder that. Yeah, I will give that some time and maybe come back with some thoughts. But I think it's a good point to make, and it's something that as an atheist I need to think about, because I've always, as far as I've investigated in terms of this subject, when I look at the different possibilities to explain the necessary existence, because there are other possibilities out there, I think we obviously have to be able to rule the other ones out, or show which one is why one is superior. And the way I've always looked at it before is probably from like an Occam's razor point of view, whereas the one with the least baggage is the one that makes the most sense. And obviously when we do that, you know, naturalistic pantheism or some sort of pantheism is to be preferred on a
no, Karlos, I have to stop you there. That's got more baggage and it's more complex than a necessary being with a will.
But let's save that for the next stream.
But Karlos, that's really important. Yeah. It's not simple beings don't mean that it's just literally simple. It means it doesn't have more complex explanations, more metaphysical baggage to it. And when you start positing an infinite number of universes, that's no longer simple. Or when you posit a materialistic, naturalistic pantheism that didn't have a will, but doesn't have the explanatory power to explain why temporal events and temporal contingent beings began to exist, even though this is eternal, it's not a simple explanation. So the simplest, using Occam's razor, the simplest explanation would be a necessary being with a will. I know Yusuf wants to stop me though.
Yeah, no, because this is an interesting conversation, but I know it's going to open up a whole another 10 hours of talking. So we just need to cut it there, because we've got another 3 people on that we want to kind of get on quickly, inshallah. But
no problem.
Appreciate you coming on as always, Karlos. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and inshallah we'll see you again on a future episode.
Yeah, I'll be back.
And we'll further this conversation. Take care, bro.
Thanks now. Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, so the next guest we've got coming on is Karan. Now, before we bring everyone on, I'm going to literally set a timer, and there's going to be no ifs, no buts. I'm going to get all tyrant on you, and I'm going to end it once we've gotten to the 5-minute mark. So the next 3 guests, so we've got Karan, we've got Mujtaba, and Haatim. As long as everything obviously goes well, and there's no reason to kind of kick you off earlier, you've got 5 minutes, so I'll bring you on, and then I'll start the timer. So, Bismillah.
5 minutes. 5 minutes after taking 1.5 hours. That's like.
I know. So I'm very sorry, bro, but it's, the conversations have already kind of gone on quite long, and so I don't want to be on here for 10 hours. I've got some other things.
Next time, probably I will, will come later or something. But next time I'll be more prepared.
Inshallah.
I wish it too long. Well, when you said inshallah, what that means?
God willing. If God wills.
What God missing? Why would God would ask something?
Say again?
If God wills.
Why God missing something? So why God is missing? When you say inshallah, it means you say God missing. If God will, it means God is missing something.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Why? It means if he wills. If it is a part of his plan, it will occur. If it's not a part of his plan.
Yusuf, what he said. Let me explain, Karan. Let me explain your position.
I say, what's the meaning of inshallah? You said if God will.
Yeah.
So I think his explanation is
only person will miss something. Only person will wish something if they're missing something.
It's not wish.
If I wish something. I wish I'm missing a beautiful car. So
we didn't say wish though. We said will.
We didn't say
wish.
Guys,
God's free wishes.
It's not like a genie in the bottle.
God gonna wish.
He's not wishing. It's not wishing.
No.
It means that the will of God is a fundamental thing.
Guys, now let's move forward. When you said the reason I joined this debate and everything, guys, when you said consciousness in English, it means awareness. It means you're aware of something. It means conscious. You're conscious of something.
That's probably one way of explaining it. There's probably other attributes and elements we can add to that as well. Carry on.
No. The way you say conscious in English, in translation in English, it means you're aware of something.
Yeah.
You're conscious of something.
Yeah.
But what you guys talking about, it in English, it means pure consciousness. So you're probably aware or not, like, the scientists or philosophers have bring this new spin in, which means pure consciousness means what we understand. Like, it's not conscious. We all conscious. We all aware of something.
Well, if you're saying pure consciousness and you've defined the first consciousness as awareness, all you're now saying is pure awareness.
Consciousness is not first or second.
So if you're talking about philosophers and scientists, they differentiate between state consciousness and creature consciousness. What you're talking about now is state consciousness. If you want to get technical. Yes. I'm just saying, if you want to get technical about it and sort of break down what it means, they differentiate between state consciousness and creature consciousness. What you're talking about is being aware of something is state conscious. Creature consciousness is different, but the most accurate, the most commonly used understanding of consciousness is what Thomas Nagel described in his paper as what it is like to be to experience something. That's the most commonly used.
Whoever described it, it's not cleared yet by science or anything. Like, that's
there is a standard way in which they use it in the philosophy of mind.
Let's try to make this simple. Listen, brother. Let me explain something to you. You only have a minute.
I'm here not for argument or anything. I'm just like, when you say conscious,
you only have 1 minute. I'm saying to you, just make your what's your thesis statement? What's your thesis statement?
No, you don't have to leave now. Just explain to us.
Just give us a minute. The general thrust.
I like that, Yusuf, my brother. But last caller, you didn't show this this timer. For me,
I know. But then So the plan is, just so you know, the podcast, we tried to stick to 2 hours. We've already gone over that.
But that's why I think next time I'm going to be more prepared. Probably I joined earlier. So I will have more fun. It's not fair. Like, you give other guy, you never show him this.
It's not about whether it's fair, bro. At the end of the day, we don't have unlimited time. If we just left the link out there and everyone that came on was to get an unlimited amount of time, we'd be here for 10 hours. I've got a wife, a child, I've got work. I have
brother Yusuf, I really.
And you've got 20 seconds.
I also myself run a channel. Like, I know how it's.
Yeah. So it's just the circumstances are unfortunate.
Maybe next time you can come more like. You can come more late, and then we can have a discussion that sticks to the topic. Maybe you can prepare some points.
That's about topic, like, atheism. I wasn't on about atheism, like, why is growing so much in Abrahamic belief?
Yeah,
5 minutes. All right, bro.
Thank you for joining, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks a lot. Okay, we appreciate you joining. Bye-bye. Thank you. Take care.
Next guest. One second, let me reset. I'm really sorry to have to rush you all. I know it can be a bit annoying, especially if you've waited for a while. But like I say, we've got a certain amount of time. We want to try and keep these to 2 hours. We've already gone over. However long the conversations are in that first 2 hours is however long they are. But once we get after that point, we're going to have to start rushing people. I was trying to rush the Karlos conversation a bit, as you may have noticed. But now I need to be strict. And as I already said before, I'm going to be like a tyrant. So
I only needed a few more minutes, and I reckon I could have got Karlos, or we could have got Karlos.
I know.
No, I know.
Right. So next one is Mujtaba. Go, bro.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum. My dear brothers. Yes, just quick. Actually, I would like that it was much longer time for me, because I was thinking that as a former atheist. That converted to Islam, I was thinking that this type of arguments, I think billions of people don't understand, and they are not interested very much to, this type of academic discussions. If, as Muslims, we can prove them that Islam has the solution to every single problems we are facing on this planet, I don't think a single rational person on this planet will reject it. Okay. For example, imagine that in a Muslim country, We have several Muslim presidents. We have had several Muslim presidents who destroyed the country. Corruption went up, and then poverty and all these things. And then an atheist or Hindu president came and proved everybody that I can solve all your problems. I believe that every single person or Muslim in that country would vote for that atheist president or Hindu president. As we know in, for example, former India, even Muslims, they followed Mahatma Gandhi, who was Hindu, because they believed that he can help them get rid of British colonialism. So if
Mujtaba, really quickly, Mujtaba,
yes.
just very quickly,
yes.
Mahatma Gandhi
yes.
actually originally used to follow the Muslims who were leading what they called the Khilafah movement, and he supported the liberation of India away from the British and to be reunited with the Ottoman Caliphate. Yeah, up until 1924 it was destroyed. Just as a correction on that.
Yes.
And also, I just wanted to ask, so are you going to try and stick to the topic of the conversation? So this stream in particular is about moving from stage 1 to stage 2. That is proving the necessary being is God. So in what way does this relate to that? Or like, are you going to move on to that, or are you trying to take it elsewhere? To a different...
No, I just say that. Yes,
he's trying to take it elsewhere. He's trying to say that he doesn't think that these arguments that we're giving is really for the masses to hear and listen to, and he's trying to promote another type of argument. Do I understand you right?
Yeah, I say that if we can prove everybody that the solution to all our problems is in Quran, and we prove them, especially if we can change our Muslim world to a better place to live, then people will follow it. We don't need to all these arguments
Muji,
that,
you know, I've spoken to you several times, so let me help you cut to the chase since you only got 5 minutes, and I already know. Okay, so yeah, you've got 2 minutes. So his argument is basically that in the Quran, the whole problem that we're seeing now is because of capitalism, and that the shaitan in the Quran is a representation of capitalism. We need to completely eradicate this, and this is going to solve all of our problems. That's your basic thesis statement. Is that right?
Okay. Yes. But
and this is the question I asked you. This is a fundamental problem with your statement here. Your thesis is that the shaitan existed long before capitalism was even dreamed of.
Brother, can we have this discussion another time so that I can explain it? You know, because I think in 2 minutes I cannot argue this with you.
I know, but I'm saying you could have endless amount of time and you could never answer that objection ever.
Can we do that? Can we do that?
Yeah.
Yes. If you can do that, then yes, please.
I was going to say really quickly, look, in your original point, and I agree, and I think we all agree generally, is that practical example of Islam, is a stronger way to attract people to Islam. I agree with you 100% on terms of that. And certainly when you couple practical example with strong intellectual arguments, then you've got a powerful recipe with regards to that. So I don't think there's any disagreement there. This stream, we covered lots of different topics. This is only 6 episodes. We've got about 40, 50 episodes planned. We do them every 2 weeks. We have other content, inshallah, as well. So we want to cover lots of different topics on this particular podcast. So I don't think there's anything in origin that we necessarily disagree with as a general point. Maybe some of the finer details about the particular arguments that you have on capitalism and shaitan.
Yeah, because the thing is wrong. This may very well be a subject we can talk about in the future. Can
we do that, please, brother? Can we arrange this? This is very, very important.
Because we have spoke about doing streams on politics as well, so discussing things like capitalism, Marxism. So these things, we do have them in mind for future episodes. I just don't think it's very related to the subject at hand. I understand. I understand that
well, yes.
What you said there is true. I would say the majority of people out there aren't really too interested in the abstract philosophical arguments. That is true. But the thing is we still want to approach these as well. We don't want to neglect them in favor of that, because not everyone is like most people. There are a number of people that do require sort of rational arguments in order to come to certain conclusions.
Mujtaba, we had two atheists that came on today. Both of them left thinking that actually we had a very strong argument for our belief.
Thinking differently, so they were convinced to some degree.
What I say that the billions of people, maybe yes, there are people, but billions of people are not so interested.
That's true.
And they don't even understand. And they don't even understand these words,
Yeah. No, it's true. And like I say, we will cover it, but it's getting late. I do need to go.
Just one final point on what you're saying, Mujtaba. Billions of people don't understand it, yes, but I think I mentioned this in the beginning, in the intro, that although billions of people don't understand the technicalities of these discussions, if you actually do break everything we're saying down, if you actually deconstruct it and come to the most foundational aspects of it, they are intuitively accessible, even though they might not know all these fancy terms, and they might not know how to philosophize about it and argument back and forth. But the direct intuition that we have generally as human beings about causality and about agent causation and the origin of the universe and ultimate explanations and teleology and morality and purpose, all of that stuff generally is directly accessible through a sound fitrah, or generally an intuition, and you just don't need to know all these terms in order for that to be the case. It doesn't have to be formally expressible or formalizable in this analytic complicated analytic manner for it to be accessible through the intuition and through the reason. So although they might not be interested in the discussion, I think they just have direct access to it.
We're gonna have to leave it there.
Just very fast, something, please.
Very fast. Even then we're gonna send it.
Yes, very fast. I say that even if you God show Himself or show miracle, people should ask why I have to follow you. Okay, if God says that I can guide you out of this jungle you're living in, then we have to follow that God that can help us to get rid of our problems. I just say that show them that God has the solution to all our problems, which is in that Quran, and prove them, then they will follow it. Not that God exists. Okay, this God, Almighty God, cannot solve our problems. Let me follow a president, a political party. That political party can show me a better, help my problem, get rid of my problems. Then I follow that political party. Not Almighty God that cannot do anything. Just say, okay, worship me. That's all.
No
so
problem.
This is, please, inshallah, in the future, I would appreciate it if you can.
Yeah, inshallah. We do.
I will talk long, and then I explain everything, inshallah. Okay?
Inshallah, no problem. Well, jazakallah khair for joining us today. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, and last but not least, Haatim. We went 4 minutes over that one, Haatim. So,
Haatim, what's up?
Well, hey guys, assalamu alaikum. Just real quick, I want to.
Walaikum salam.
Haatim's our guy, so.
Hey, so I wanted to ask real quick, what if a contention to the that like it implies will, that you have an eternal cause and a temporal effect? What if a contention was perhaps it's not a will, but an undiscovered, indeterminate, let's call it like mechanism or something?
Yeah, and perhaps the will you're interacting with right now, or the mind you're interacting with right now, isn't really a will or isn't really a mind. Perhaps it's some undiscovered mechanism, and you're just in this illusion that you're talking to somebody who has a mind and a will. So, yeah, I guess the same would apply. We're making an inference to the best explanation.
Yeah, I agree with Abdulrahman, and that's the only thing I wanted to hear. That's why I came on this call. Thank you for watching.
Assalamu rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, alhamdulillah. So we've got to the last of the guests. So we'll try wrap up now. I'm gonna rush you guys as well. You've all got 1 minute timers. Oh, we're joking. But yeah, we'll wrap up now. We'll try to leave it there for today. It's been a great podcast. I think we've had some really nice conversations. So we'll begin with Brother Jake. and we'll move.
I mean, just really quickly, I think it was a good stream. I think Karlos and Justin both felt, as far as I could tell anyway, felt the force of the argument from the will and the necessary being having a will. If it does have a will, then how do you explain that on a naturalistic paradigm? It favors the theistic, or if you want to go with Karlos and be technical, deistic, doesn't really matter, that this being, this necessary being, is God, and this is what we mean by God. And so, yeah, I think that was good. I think that was enough to be sufficient to explain what we were trying to get from stage 1 to stage 2. Part of the issue that I see is when you get the atheist to stage 1 and you try to bring them to stage 2, they kind of see where it's going and they try to revert back to stage 1 to say, well, wait, what about this? Like, dude, you already agreed to stage 1. We're going to stage 2. It's like you're pulling him along. He's like, no. But yeah, so I think from that aspect, it's a little bit frustrating, but I think it's to be expected because I see it as a defense mechanism because they don't really have a good answer to where you're bringing them to stage 2. So the only thing to really do is to go back to stage 1 and then cast doubt on that. And yeah, I mean, the best we can do is point out when that happens and try to pull them back and say, hey, we're talking about stage 2. I thought you agreed to stage 1. But, other than that, I think in the long run, we were able to point that out and make sufficient arguments for the stage 2. So with that, I'll leave it to you guys. Sharif, if you want to go next.
Counterclockwise. Is it me now? I'll be really quick, hopefully.
You got a 30-second timer then.
I agree with Jake, though. It's a classic sort of atheist move, which is sort of they go, yeah, okay, we can accept a necessary being. But it could be naturalistic. And then you say, well, okay, let's use the same argument that we came to a necessary being. The same premises are going to lead to a necessary being that had intentionality. And then suddenly they start, some of them will start talking about multiverses and, an infinite regress is a possibility again, suddenly, when it wasn't. So, yeah, so I think it is a back and forth. And this is what tends to happen is that, as they move their top, maybe 2 steps forward, 1 step back, you keep that engagement going. And inshallah, hopefully they'll understand it. In terms of the discussion, we mentioned about an eternal cause, but a temporary effect implies a will. We said contingent beings that could have number of possibilities requires something to actualize that one possibility as opposed to another possibility, again requires a will. We said that consciousness cannot be grounded on materialism, therefore consciousness must be explained by something other than a non-conscious agent, therefore a conscious agent. And the third one was not to set arbitrary limits upon this necessary being. And by placing the arbitrary limit of not being conscious, when consciousness exists in other beings, is an arbitrary limit and requires a further explanation. So based on those 4 arguments, I think it's very clear that necessary being has to have consciousness.
MashaAllah. Now, Brother Abdulrahman, do you want to wrap up there? No, Abdulrahman.
Can't hear you, Abdul.
Sorry.
No forgiveness. No forgiveness.
Yeah, so I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I think as far as the stage 1 arguments are concerned, we've touched upon them. Generally, a lot of atheists, philosophers, and laymen alike are starting to become more receptive to this idea of a necessary being, and it seems to be plausible that there is something necessary. Or that there is a first cause. There are many different routes to the same kind of conclusion that there is a necessary foundation. And when we talked about stage 2 cosmological arguments and the different kinds of arguments that Brother Sharif just mentioned, and there are more, I think all in all, we can either make the stronger case, which I think is very doable and very plausible, that if we're going to be consistent in our epistemology and if we're going to take seriously the foundations of our beliefs and our knowledge as a whole, then we can make the strong and conclusive claim that God necessarily exists. Even if we're going to make the weaker claim that it it is rational to believe that God exists, although it isn't necessarily true. I don't think that weaker claim is necessary, by the way, because I think the stronger claim is very doable. I think we've demonstrated that, and we can do that further. But even if we do go down that route of the weaker claim that it is at least there is a rational basis for it, then and we say that there is a rational basis for cosmology, the origin of the world, and stuff like objective morality, consciousness, free will, teleology. All of these stuff, we have a rational basis to ground that in God. And then the atheist comes and wants to reduce every single one of these aspects to a physical component to say that, no, there is no ultimate meaning. They might be able to do that. But I think that given the fact that the direct consequence of this atheistic worldview is nihilism, not in the sense that they can't have their own personal meaning, but in the sense that their belief about these bigger questions are kind of meaningless in the sense that they don't really affect anything, when the fact that objective truth doesn't really have an ultimate purpose. So when it doesn't, and you do realize that there is this epistemic permissiveness in the sense that it can be rational to believe in God, I think in that case, holding on to your non-belief when you know that it doesn't really matter, and just ignoring, sweeping under the carpet everything about the rational basis for this purpose that accounts for everything in our experience is completely irrational. I just think that's a bit of a Pascal's wager there, and we can have an episode about Pascal's wager. But I think all in all, it's irrational to be an atheist given the cumulative case we made here.
Alhamdulillah. And I won't beat a dead horse. I think the brothers have pretty much wrapped it up well enough there, and no need for me to add to anything, or my inability to add to anything that hadn't already been covered anyway. So alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair to everyone who's been with us today, and to anyone who watches this later rather than being live. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't already subscribed, do so now. The subscribe button is obviously down there, and make sure when you do subscribe you hit the bell and click all notifications so that you get get notified for every episode that we do. Other than that, want to kind of remind people to follow us on social media. So we've got Twitter, which is at @T_A_podcast. So do check us out there. I'll pull it up on the screen now as well. So there's our Twitter. And if you search Thought Adventure Podcast on Instagram or Facebook, you should find us there as well. And we have recently just started uploading our episodes onto all major platforms for podcasting. So things like Apple Podcasts, what's the other one? Spotify, Google Podcasts, all of them. You should find us there, inshallah. If you don't find us on a particular platform, leave a comment below. Let us know, and we'll try and get on there as well. And yeah, so if you found this interesting, don't forget to engage. So leave comments. Engagement will be appreciated, and let us know if you found our arguments convincing, or if it raised more questions, or if you found them not convincing at all. Do let us know in the comment section, and we'll obviously be sure to check them out and try to engage with you when we have time, inshallah. Other than that, help us out by sharing, liking, and overall just talking about us with people when you're speaking to them. Mention us by name and things like that. But other than that, thank you to everyone again who has joined us today. Stay tuned. We'll keep you updated on social media with the topic of our next conversation. But other than that, does anyone want to say anything before we say goodbye? No? Okay.
No.
Alhamdulillah. All right, everyone. Well, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam.